To the future or to the past, to a time when thought is free, when men are different from one another and do not live alone, to a time when truth exists and what is done cannot be undone, from the age of uniformity, from the age of solitude, from the age of Big Brother, from the age of doublethink. Greetings. This is your right geek, honorary man king, leader of the Awkward Cough Squad, and now apparently supporter of domestic terrorist mama bears, here with my usual panel of book club members, number one Marmaduke fan, or today, number
Hey,
one
hey,
Big
hey.
Brother fan, and Punchy Sonatu. Today he is Punchy Gold Stonatu. How are you today?
We are the dead.
We are the dead.
Thank you for having us on today.
So yeah. So I was holding off on picking this one for the dystopian discussions because it is the obvious one that pretty much everybody who has been to a school in the United States has encountered at some point in their childhood. But I think now is the time, because we've gone over several other dystopian numbers, now is the time to talk about 1984. And am I right to say that all of us here first encountered 1984 when we were in school at some point?
Yeah, I was
Like,
14. Okay, funny story. I was 14, and it was just on like the list of 100 great books you can pick from to write a report on. It was the first book I ever read that had a sex scene in it. One of the and I actually found my freshman high school report on it. And the thing that stood out to me most was the extended torture sequence for the last third of the book.
yeah. And how about you, Punchy? Did you read it when you were growing up in Cookville?
Oh God, I can't believe Marmaduke just said that. I'm not sure if I should tell this story of how I first encountered it. I probably should have run it by you guys before the show. But whatever. This is an adult show, right? I'll keep it non.
Yes, it is.
But basically,
my channel is Bark Not for Kids.
Yeah, I didn't exactly encounter it at school. I encountered it at boarding school. So I guess that's sort of school, but it wasn't assigned reading at that time. It was later on in school, but not when I encountered it. It was a gift to me, a secret Santa gift from the son of a newscaster. Actually, he was like an old boy in my dorm, and he'd got me as his secret Santa buddy or whatever, and he gave me a copy of 1984, and apparently he felt really bad about it because he didn't want to give like I think it was like 11 or 12 or something, this 12-year-old a book for Christmas. So he brought me to his room and gave me a second gift, which was my very first issue of Playboy. Kind of under the table. So
what do they call it? They call it porn sack or something.
Yeah. So I got the porn sack and 1984. Yeah. It's like, I'm sorry. I really liked the book. I thought it was a great book, but you'll probably enjoy the Playboy. And honestly, like I think I might like 1984 a little bit better. I might have got more out of it in retrospect. But yeah, that was how I encountered it. It was more informal than school. It was just a gift, so I wound up reading it, and of course I had to do it for school later on because American schools love their 1984. But yeah, what about
American
you?
schools love this book. Yeah.
What about you, Crime Think Geek?
Oh, Crime Think Geek says that my story of first encountering 1984 is much more prosaic than that. I was it was my summer assignment for AP European History as I was going into 10th grade. They gave us a list of books that we could read and write reports on, kind of like Marmaduke's experience.
Yeah.
And And I'll be honest with you, I chose 1984 and Animal Farm because they were short compared to the other books on the list.
That works.
Um, so those were the ones that I read and wrote reports on as they, I was supposed to discuss how they were, not just what happened in the books, but also how they were related to what we were going to study in the coming year in AP European history. So that was my first encounter. Yeah.
What were you studying then? What was the what was the tie-in, or is that going to be too much information too quickly for right now?
Well, the AP European History course at that time, which was the early 90s, I don't know how it is now, but that course started with basically late medieval Europe, and then it just kind of taught the history of Europe up until the modern day. So because modern European history was included in that, I believe that they put 1984 and Animal Farm on the list of possible summer reads because they are linked in with Europe's experience with communism and fascism in modern European history. So I believe that was the thinking of the AP European history teacher. Unfortunately, I don't even remember who that teacher was, so I can't actually contact. I believe it was a her and say, why was that on the list? But but I can see, they were both written in a context by a European watching what was going on in European history in his time period and making commentary on it. So that's how I was told to look at it.
I had an informative comment from an artist named Troy Reiser. I'll have to look it up, but he mentioned to me that George Orwell had actually had to flee from some European communists. So for him, there was a real personal stake in this whole debate.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the nature.
Yeah. So
of communism, isn't it? That's what happens when you're a communist. You get the other communists trying to deplatform you. So.
I was about to comment that it's pretty much widely known that Orwell himself was on the left, and he was involved with the leftists who were fighting in the Spanish Civil War, but while he was there, he saw how the true communists behaved and got very turned off by it, and as you said, had to flee from communists that were after his blood.
Here it is. Orwell fighting with the leftist Republicans, barely escaped Spain with his life. Russian Soviets held full sway over the Republican forces at that point, and they were old school Bolsheviks, big on purges. Orwell was a marked man and knew it. It was a very near thing. At Troy Reiser.
Yeah. So Orwell is kind of like the disaffected leftist of today, who has been bounced out of the party, so to speak, because they had one instant of crime think. Suddenly you can't be a part of our movement anymore, basically.
But is he, though? Because this was something that I was going to bring up maybe later. Again, this is probably going to wind up being like 8 different shows.
Does Orwell think that communism was a good idea in theory, but not in practice?
Well, maybe. I guess my question, like an overall question for the rest of the show, it doesn't have to be resolved right now, but are there still Orwells? Are there still people on the left who'd be so disaffected that they would come up with a hot take along the lines of Orwell? Or was Orwell's hot take, because he has a very liberal hot take when you get right down to it. It's a very sort of classically liberal hot take on the importance of free speech and freedom of thought and objectivity versus subjectivity and all these different things. Have we now got to the point where the Orwells of today, the Google employees who decide to go rogue and abandon their posts, are they now so far gone that they will never again have like an Orwellian take on things?
All right. I mean, probably his life experience helps, right? Like if you only know of communism through your political science 101 class, that kind of robs you of some of the critical life experience that might get you to rethink your theory. I've seen little things like it. Like I've seen things like, Dave Rubin being part of the Young Turks and feeling disaffected by it. I think there was that whole Democrat exodus or whatever that movement was, where the gay guy who started it got canceled. I don't know. Like I see bits and pieces of it. I've never seen anything quite like Orwell, where there are even parts where I hear him writing like he still has sympathy for Marx's ideas, but he's so horrified by what the threat that Ingsoc poses. It's sort of like he's willing to put aside his old romantic socialism and just wail on the problem. So if there's a problem of kind of like a naive socialist who keeps saying, "Oh, well, that wasn't real communism," I think Orwell is trying to say to that person, "You have to take this problem dead seriously." He's kind of like screaming that at him, especially for like the last third of the book and all the torture.
Right. I would say that I believe that there are people who are committed, I would say, social democrats. So they're definitely on the left. They're on the left in the sense that they want, they want a bigger welfare state, right? They want universal health care, but are still fundamentally liberal when it comes to rights, when it comes to free speech and objectivity and things like that. I think that those people do exist. I have encountered them on YouTube and on Twitter. But when you talk, but there's also the class of people that were left and became disaffected from it, and then they ended up moving right. So that's actually a good question. That's a good question, whether how many people who are solidly left and still are solidly left and yet hate and can't stand what passes for the social justice left, essentially. I believe they do exist, but there are a lot of people that started off on the left and after encountering the social justice left became disaffected and started talking more with conservatives, and then we're like, these conservatives seem to have some good ideas that I never considered before, and they actually start moving a little more center and a little more right. So yeah, that is a good question. Do we have Orwell's out there? Yeah.
Well, I honestly I can't answer it. I'll just be straight up. Like, I don't know whether there's still a capacity for having Orwell's, at least in the sort of positions of power that George himself was at. Like, I'm thinking specifically like, the people in big tech, the people in journalism, right? In approved journalism. I mean, obviously there's a great upswelling of independent journalists who are very kind of Orwellian in a positive sense, right? Like George Orwellian, not like Big Brother Orwellian.
Right.
But I hope you guys are right. I mean, I do definitely think that there are people, who were like committed leftists who kind of wake up and get like anti-woke, super woke, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I know. Yeah,
it's kind of happening in the proles. It's happening amongst the proles. It's the ordinary shit posters on Twitter versus
you have
the blue.
Faith. You have faith in the proles. You think that the revolution is going to spark in the hearts of the proles.
But then the proles are too stupid to understand anything. So they'll never be in consciousness.
Yeah, I mean that's something. That's something I've thought a lot. Like browsing on 4chan and things. thinking about like censorship and AI and big tech, and I'm like, yeah, but there are so many great shit posters and trolls, and these guys are the future, and they'll rise up. But then at other times, I'm like, nah, they're not going to care. They're just going to get distracted by a TikTok video. Right?
I mean, I kept thinking about how Winston Smith is basically like a prototype of the sad, Wojak feels bad, bro, kind of guy.
Because
he's always on.
He's the Zoomer meme.
Yeah, he's on the outside. Something's wrong. He's not sure what. So I don't know. The whole Pearl angle. Maybe we could talk about this more when we get to the Pearl stuff in the book. But the Pearl angle is kind of weird. I even thought it was weird when I was in high school, because you basically have this very well thought out dystopia and how all the bits and pieces of its ideology and its tools of propaganda hang together, and they almost half ignore the proles. Oh yeah, like the proles are too dumb for us to worry too much about. Oh yeah, so we'll write some propaganda songs and propaganda porn for the proles, but they'll never rise up, so they can be free for all we care. There's just some really weird aspects to 1984 as dystopia, as well as I guess Goldsteinism is kind of weird, because that whole chunk of book is essentially Orwell writing in a straightforward way the political ideology of Big Brother that's already been laid out in the first chunk of the book, where we see the effect of it. But then that whole section is kind of weird, because, well, is that Orwell sort of, speaking through Goldstein what he thinks? Is that Orwell creating a character, and so we shouldn't necessarily see Goldstein as Orwell? I guess all of Goldstein's book was made by Big Brother, so it could all be lies for all we know. There are lots of, I don't know, questions that hang over that I don't know. It's hard to tackle for me.
Yeah, I actually, when I reread the book again recently, I also thought that the prole angle was interesting. The fact that, as you say, the proles were basically left alone because, as you say, they were basically viewed like animals, essentially. Well, we'll let the animals do what they want.
Yeah. They can get married and have loving marriages.
Yeah. And let me see if I can find a comment that I wrote when I ran into that. Let's see. Because I did write a comment in the book. I gotta look at my copy of the book.
So do you guys want to go with the proles for right now then? Like, do we have an itinerary?
Yes, let's go with the proles. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Since it has been brought up, let's go with the proles to start. Yeah.
Roll with the proles, because I know Marmaduke, you while she's looking, you wrote an interesting tweet on Twitter. About how you were going to do a hot take that wasn't going to just focus on like the normie stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So my thought is maybe one of the problems with 1984 is it's read so much and it's memed so much. Everybody talks about 1984 and they get right into the political phrases, Big Brother, doublethink, and I do think that's interesting stuff. But one of the things that stood out to me reading it as an adult is Winston's character is pretty well developed. We basically spend just the whole first chunk of the book following Winston's day-to-day life and seeing the world through his eyes. And he has this really desperate urge, I think, to find some humanity. He wants to connect with the humanity of the past. Right Geek read the quote where he wants to leave something for humanity of the future. There's some sections where he looks at the proles and he'll see an old lady singing, and she has like bright red arms from washing, and it's sort of like he sees a human spirit within the proles. When he remembers his mother as having this human spirit of caring for her children, even if she couldn't save her children's lives. So Winston is desperately looking for this sense of human dignity. I think he's kind of like ineffective at finding it. He wants to resist, but he's a little pathetic and incapable of resisting, and kind of knows before he even starts that he's doomed. And at the end of the book, all of his human dignity is taken away from him. So one of the things I guess I forgot from reading the book the first time is Winston's character really is the hinge, I think, that everything hangs on. And I actually found this really interesting quote by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote a review of 1984 where he argued that Animal Farm is just a much better version of 1984. It was an interesting argument and one of Lewis's arguments was that there's no hero in 1984, and the character's a little too pathetic for his punishment to mean anything tragic, right? Like for something to be tragic, you have to give the character some, heroic, decent qualities so that their fall means something. And he contrasted that with Boxer the horse in 1984, right? I want to praise Lewis while disagreeing with Lewis. So when I read that quote and read that review by Lewis, I kind of thought back to when I was a kid. And when I was a little kid and I watched the cartoon of Animal Farm, I probably cried for a week over the death of Boxer the horse, and it really, really affected me. And when I was a high school student, I read 1984. I kind of forgot about Winston Smith pretty quickly, right? So I think Lewis is nailing something where he says that Animal Farm condenses the point a little bit better, and that Winston and Julia are not particularly heroic people in 1984. But my pushback against Lewis is, I think for Orwell's point to work, he needs to set up Winston as a potential hero. And then when Winston's trapped in the Ministry of Love, and it's the boot of tyranny is the boot smashing on a human face forever, that just graphic, endless physical and psychological torture of Winston. The point of it is to say that mankind and these sort of like decent ideas of the goodness of mankind and the human spirit and individualism cannot fight against something like Big Brother's perfected system, right? If 1984 had a happy ending, 1984 just wouldn't work as a book anymore. And I think that Winston, the flawed hero, is supposed to. His purpose in the story is to set us up for that like scream of, you can never let this happen, because if it ever happens, we can never get out of it again. So I guess that was my hot take, is that beyond just the political point, we've got an interesting character and really good prose description. There's like neat little details, like the boiled cabbage, the smell of boiled cabbage, Winston's cigarettes that keep falling apart. It really is an enjoyable book to get into, I think. So that was basically my Twitter hot take resummarized.
Okay, I found the comment that I wrote. It was on this section. There was a vast amount of criminality in London, a whole world within a world of thieves, bandits, prostitutes, drug peddlers, and racketeers of every description. But since it all happened among the proles themselves, it was of no importance. In all questions of morals, they were allowed to follow their ancestral code. The sexual puritanism of the party was not imposed upon them. Promiscuity went unpunished, divorce was permitted. For that matter, even religious worship would have been permitted if the proles had shown any sign of needing or wanting it. They were beneath suspicion. As the party slogan put it, pros and animals are free. And the comment that I put, which is pretty spicy, was, feels a lot like how today's SJs view black people.
Okay.
That's all.
There's an underclass, and we pretend to carry the torch for the underclass, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's actually interesting that you singled that out, because this is something that we'll probably get into later. But I had like my big hot take for the whole thing was going to be a story about like trauma and violence and how it can get you to basically pull a Winston Smith and abandon your principles in the context of libertarian anarchist agorism. which will probably require a little bit of explanation. But that section in particular, I think, expresses a lot about the agorist spirit and about the hope for the future that the black markets and the grey markets and the officially unsanctioned, but it still goes on stuff. How that can help society in the long run and serve as a moral agent. But yeah, what specifically did you think about that, right? Or Crime Think Geek, sorry. Like, are you do you support that line of reasoning that he has, or you think it's mostly about black people then today, or?
Well, not just black people, but that was my immediate thought when I was reading the book, and I think the reason that I wrote that is that, as you say, the SJ left puts on a big show about caring for the disadvantaged, caring for the marginalized, quote unquote, or the underprivileged, right? But they don't actually offer what is it I'm trying to say? They don't encourage the sorts of things that would allow people to become not marginalized and not underprivileged, right? And I'm coming at this.
That's actually
basically, and we had so.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm coming at this as an educator. Yeah. As an educator, there's a very strong strain of thought, or what I've seen is a very strong strain of thought among our educrats that populations who are marginalized or underprivileged should not be held to any standards whatsoever. We're not going to give failing grades anymore because failing grades are racist. We're not going to grade people based on their conscientiousness. Turning homework in on time, sitting still in class. Expecting students to sit still and listen in class is now considered to be racist. Saying that teaching students the times tables and expecting them to master the procedural aspect of mathematics, the algorithms for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, that too is racist. It's emphasizing white supremacy to teach the standard algorithms for arithmetic. This is wildly popular among our educrats and among the most prestigious ed schools. Now, I put prestigious in scare quotes too, because ed schools, in my opinion, are basically the bottom rung of academia. They attract the dumbest, stupidest people on planet Earth, as far as I'm concerned, as a teacher. So, so I'm hearing all of this as an educator. Oh no, we can't expect Black people to master math, reading, writing proper English, sitting still in class, turning their homework in on time. And, this is what's in my head as I'm reading. Trolls are free. We're not going to impose any standards on them. They can do whatever they want. And I think that's where that comment came from.
Rationality is a construct of whiteness. Maybe my addition to Crime Think Geek is, I think, in America, race is to Americans what the class system is to Brits. Where if you read British novels, they're always going on about the class system. And Americans kind of have this idea that, well, I'm not poor, I'm just a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. So if you want to divide Americans, then our racial history and kind of like the history of racial grievance is what you can use, especially if you're like a crafty group seeking political power. Then that can be an angle that works in America better than just a naked appeal to class or wealth would be.
Well, is that just American though? Because this is something that I've gone on rants about on Twitter, which is one of the reasons why I don't use Twitter anymore. but basically, just for people who've never followed me, which is about everybody listening to this stream, my own personal theory about this, right, is that the left is no longer Marxist, at least not in a traditional sense, right? Like the left still, not in they're not classical Marxists any more than they are classical liberals, right? You say you're liberal, you say you're Marxist. There are some aspects of Marx that they retain, namely the focus on conflict theory and like zero-sum competitions between groups. But I think that the contemporary left has almost completely excised this focus on class, and maybe it is an American thing. Like I've never actually considered whether it's simply American, because it's happening in the UK too, in Europe as well. But I think, like personally, from my perspective, I think it was mostly the triumph of capitalism in the 1980s and the 1990s that killed off the old class conscious Marxists, right? And now the only Marxists left, you still need a conflict for everybody to fight about. Why not make it race, right? We get to keep our position as champagne socialists, right? Because that was a big thing all throughout the 20th century. Was this cognizance of hypocrisy amongst the sort of upper class Marxists, how they were rich and powerful and privileged, but they were also fighting for the working class, who tended to be more conservative and more liberal and more religious, and all these kind of bad, what the Leninists would call the lumpen proletariat, right? The bad proles. So I think after the 1980s and the 1990s, it became fashionable to sort of get rid of class altogether. And it's interesting. I'll just relay a quick little personal anecdote, because I mentioned the boarding school I was at, right? When I was growing up, there was this boarding school that I was at, and it was full of extremely wealthy individuals, extremely privileged individuals from all over the world. Kind of millionaires and billionaires and boy geniuses, and some normies who get in on outreach scholarships and all these kinds of things. And it was literally multicultural and cosmopolitan, right? It wasn't just you go to New York City and you see a whole bunch of different Americans who come from different backgrounds and have funny accents but are still Americans, right? No, it was actually people from Ghana next to a person who spent all his life in Shanghai, next to some Swedish kid or something, right? And they all kind of mesh together into this one little 3-acre campus.
A collective international elite.
One of these. It wasn't the most elite of boarding schools. It was kind of a party boarding school, right? It had a reputation for being the weirdo boarding school, right? Places like Deerfield looked down on them, but it was still very rich, the children of the inner party, basically. To relate this to 1984, it was where the inner party sent their kids to be educated. And the thing was, again, there's kids from all over the world. They're completely different races: African, Asian, European, American, whatever you want to say. You can find a kid like that. But they all got along, which was the weird thing. They're all of the same class. They all have the same basic level of privilege, and the only kids that were really kind of on the outside were some of the blacks, but it wasn't all of the blacks. The rich blacks got along with all the other rich kids. It was the poor black people that came in through the sort of social justice scholarships. Many of them were very intelligent and hardworking, and I'm not gonna go ethno-state on you guys, because I am myself a reformed leftist, so I still have sympathies for these SJW outreach programs. But basically, from my experience, my limited experience growing up with people of amazing levels of privilege, was that they were divided more by class than anything else. Like the classic like Marxist communist versus fascist argument is right. How is society fundamentally divided? Right? How do people divide themselves up? And the communist answer, like the classical communist answer, is that people divide themselves up by class, the rich versus the poor. Whereas the fascist answer is that people divide themselves by nationality and
blood and soil.
Heritage. Yeah, blood and soil. It's like the rich white guy has more in common with the poor white guy than he does with the rich black guy, and the poor black guy has more in common with the rich black guy than he does with the poor white guy. Right? Like this kind of thing. So just to bring it back, like I think that is now the state of the left. Like the left has completely abandoned classical Marxism and the idea that class is the great divider. And they've done it in a really weird sort of like, hey, we're for diversity way, right? Like a Trojan horse, saying, yeah, we're going to be in favor of racial equality and equity and harmony. But in so doing, they've completely gotten rid of the idea of racial harmony and equality, and they've made conflicts between races and sexualities now, gender, transgender, right? Any kind of little balkanization is now the main focus.
It's all getting worse. Yeah, every human interaction where leftist theory enters, it raises the temperature of everything. Like I do not remember. I've remembered transgender and transsexual people existing all my life, and there's always just kind of like been this very general. I think like all Americans have a little bit default libertarian mindset, maybe at least at like the pro or middle class level. It's like, oh yeah, that guy is a transsexual, but it takes all sorts. Like even if you have like a religious objection, there's like this. Well, it's not my circus, not my monkeys attitude. And then when it becomes the social topic that the elites declare, the elites always declare we're going to have a national conversation on one of these issues, and then it just blows up.
Hate week now. Everybody get your hats on and go to the march. Right?
I wrote in my blog once that whenever they say we need to have a national conversation about something, I said on my blog that, well, I would be okay with that if it was an actual conversation. But what it really is a monologue in which these leftist elites yell at us for hours on end about how terrible we all are. That's not a conversation.
I want to connect something Punchy was talking about with an illustration in 1984. So I've worked in basically like manufacturing, right? So I meet a lot of blue collar guys, and I've talked to kind of like blue collar working class guys who really have that old school Marxist resentment of the rich. Like no one should have that level of wealth. If I had just a little piece of that wealth, I'd be okay. And why is the world this way? And what I would try to do in these conversations is get them to think of themselves as different from like the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world who claim to represent them. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is part of an elite. She wears a princely dress and walks around unmasked at elite parties at Met Galas. And she thinks if she stamps the words "tax the rich" on her elite dress, that makes her one of the proles. And really, she's not. The irony is the right wing and the left wing, hard hat wearing construction guys seem to have a lot in common. The Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes and maybe the more right-leaning, business class Republican types, they seem to have something in common too, right? So I guess what's weird about these divisions, I guess Punchy brought up, is class division real anymore? Is race division just like an alternative to it? I feel like one of the important points of 1984 is it's really trying to get us to see the inner party as a group that exists in contrast to maybe like the classic capitalist versus socialist divide. Sort of like in Oceania, the capitalist versus socialist divide falls apart and doesn't matter anymore. Like, who cares if the revolutionaries were more socialist or more fascistic? Now that they're in command, it's them against the world, right? Yeah. Okay. You don't create a tyranny to protect a revolution. You start a revolution in order to establish a tyranny, I think, is my paraphrase of the quote.
Yeah, he did say something to that effect. Yeah.
One last thing, I'm going to connect this to something you said, Reiki, because you also kind of made the point that when you talk about social justice types, there's also there's like the social justice type who's like a stupid kid, right? And there's like the social justice type who is an elite teacher, running a PTA. So I feel like that's what's difficult about describing these things is any of these groups could cut across each other, right? So you could have wealth be a way of dividing people into groups, but then you could also have race be a way of dividing people into groups. You could have ideology be a way of dividing people into groups, and maybe just mentality or ideological stubbornness, I guess. Like, to be part of the inner party is to fully embody what doublethink is, and maybe that's the big difference between the inner party and the outer party is, can you learn how to think properly to operate in the inner party? Anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it.
Well,
I was going to say.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Reiki. I had a question.
I was going to say that. All right, because I've been reading Thomas Sowell's triptych on the conflict of visions here, and I think what we're kind of approaching here is the observation that people on a lot of leftists, like AOC, for example, say that they are for the little guy, but are very clearly members of the elite. And I'd say a thinker like Thomas Sowell would say that that's been an indelible feature of what he calls the unconstrained vision. Basically, the idea he's observed that throughout since at least the 18th century in Western thought, there's been two general trains of thought that have held consistent throughout the centuries. So there's one that's called the unconstrained, and that's the one that believes that mankind is capable of solving the problems that are caused by cosmic injustice, like cosmic injustice in the sense that the disadvantages that you get from being born, right, in a particular circumstance, in a particular social class or ethnic subgroup or whatever.
If you're born with a disability, that's a cosmic injustice.
Yeah. They're a cosmic injustice. Nobody, you don't have any control over that. It's an unmerited disadvantage that you have. The unconstrained vision believes that mankind is capable of fixing all of those cosmic injustices. Now, because they believe that mankind is capable of that, then they have to believe that there are some men whose abilities to judge who deserves what, their abilities must be way above the abilities of the common man, right? So having that unconstrained vision, which is a feature of most left-wing thought, the idea that the government can fix all of these things that are cosmic injustices, you have to believe that there are some people who are more enlightened, more capable, and more able to make those judgments, who can then make those decisions for everybody else. So the leftist thought basically requires that there be an intellectual and moral elite that stands above everyone else. Whereas the what he calls the constrained vision, which is the one that tends to run through most of conservative thought, believes that no man, no matter how smart they are, they could be Albert freaking Einstein for all they care. No one is able to marshal the kind of knowledge you need in order to actually control the economy or whatever. No one has that ability. So, interestingly enough, everyone looks at the the more conservative strains of thought as locking in elites versus the underclass or whatever. But it turns out that they're much more egalitarian in reality, because they look at the elites and they look at the underclass and they say they're all basically human beings, and none of them are capable of actually controlling all of this information. So, so the thrust of this is that I think Orwell has observed through his own life experience that leftist thought inevitably results in a split between the proles, who are considered to be lesser than, right, versus the members of the party who are the elite, who are supposed to be more capable of good judgment, good morals, and good decision making. Yeah.
The oligarchy. I want to contrast that to something in 1984. So, yes, I agree. I think that's a good framework. Is what can you do with human nature, right? And then one of the marks of what like O'Brien is trying to do is he's literally trying to control reality. He's trying to change reality through political power and change the nature of man through political power.
Right.
So interpreting Orwell as a semi-disaffected socialist who still has like romantic attachment to old school, like classical Marxism. One of the big traits of Oceania is it has this nationalistic vibe. They use war with East Asia or Eurasia, whichever one it is at the moment, to whip people up into a frenzy and a constant state of panic. So I think it's true that Orwell is saying it's a socialist elite that becomes the new oligarchy and rules over Oceania. I think that Orwell would also say like a nationalistic right-wing elite would pose just the same threat. And I think he also believes that the nationalistic angle, or at least the pretend war, the pretend state of constant war, is a necessary piece of the puzzle that Big Brother uses to keep people in line. So I don't know. So I think that in maybe like midwit leftist thought, the thought process is Nazis were nationalist socialists. The important part of that phrase is the nationalist part. Therefore, if you're a conservative, that means you're a patriot. If you're a patriot, you're a nationalist. If you're a nationalist, you're a Nazi. So everyone on the right is a Nazi by that line of reasoning. Whereas I think Orwell's intelligent enough to see that nationalism could be an angle of it, but there's also, I think you're right, that he's also seeing that the socialist angle, I think he still believes that they are inconsistent with the old socialist principles, but nothing is basically stopping the socialist oligarchy from instituting everything that the principled romantic socialists would hate. So maybe Orwell's a little bit more left-wing than the Thomas Sowell framework would allow him to be, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the this might sound really pretentious, but it's the Hegelian dialectic, isn't it? It's
that's what Marx was ripping off, right? He wanted to take Hegel and apply Hegel to economics.
Yeah, you get these opposing theories.
Marx was a young Hegelian, I think.
Well, they get these just to explain for the audience in case you don't get the reference. You take these opposing views, right, and you have them have a dialogue with each other, and what eventually results from that dialogue between these two, bitterly opposed views is a synthesized view that's somewhere in the middle that incorporates aspects of both. It's like what's the thing that all the Zoomers like these days? Nazbol, right? You guys know Nazbol, or are you familiar with
National Bolshevism? Yeah.
with Alexander Dugin, that actually Lauren Southern was getting into him before she got voluntarily deplatformed right before all the leaks from Milo came out. But yeah, it's that kind of stuff, right? Like you have the socialists who are very class conscious, and you have the capitalists who want to hold on to their money, and they're oligarchs, and they clash and they fight, and then what winds up resulting, at least in Orwell's theory, which I think was very prescient, was this oligarchical collectivism, right? Because on the one hand, you have individualism versus collectivism, right? You know, and individualism is often associated, at least in the 20th century, it was associated with the capitalists and the wealthy and the liberals and the West, right? And collectivism is associated with the socialists and the East and the communists. So you mesh these two things, the oligarchs and the collectivists, and you wind up with a collectivist system that's run by the oligarchs, much to the disaster of everybody involved. So yeah, I do think that there's that aspect of these groups mixing. One thing that I was wondering before I forget, because earlier, Marmaduke, you'd said that the inner party needed to truly embody the values of INCSOC, right?
I think so, yeah. So and I think there's even some dialogue where they have to believe their own propaganda even more than the outer party does. I mean, like no one believes that the war is real more than the inner party, even though they also simultaneously know that they're kind of using the war as a propaganda piece, right?
Okay, do you remember where that was and who was saying? Was that one of the Goldstein things?
It might have been. That might have been Goldstein trying to describe the inner party, which could be O'Brien lying. Now that's the problem. Maybe O'Brien's lying a little bit.
That's what I'm wondering. Whether, because I definitely think that the outer party, right? You know, the kind of the Google employees and the technocrats and stuff, and yeah. Again, before I forget, Bright Geek, I think you were exactly right as well when you're bringing up the soul stuff, because this gets back to what's been the thesis for the entire series. Basically, is like the nature of progressivism and technocrats, right? You know, you've got these people who believe that they have the right ability to engineer society, and this is common throughout all utopian novels. But I think that the actual foot soldiers, right? You know, the people who have to stand in the line, like the NCOs and things, who have to organize all the stuff on the ground, right? You know, the outer party of the technocracy. I think they really do have to embody the virtues of INCSOC, or at least they have to make a good show of it on the outside. The inner party, I'm not so sure. I mean, it may be the case, like Orwell might have assumed that the inner party needs to really believe all this stuff. But I think when you're at that level of power and at that level of privilege, it doesn't really matter what you think anymore. It just matters what you tell other people to think, right? Like,
so are you thinking of things like them drinking wine and banging prostitutes? Like, once you get to be in the inner party, you get to break the rules that you can kill someone else, a lower party member. Well,
this is again. I mean, maybe I'm bringing too much of my own sort of background into this, but this is like the essence of like Satanism and all these kind of occult religions and stuff. Right? Like you have a mystery religion that you can initiate people into, right? And for the people outside of the mystery religion, you give one face, but then when you get into the inner party, right, all things wash away, right? You know, all the rules are gone. You are allowed to do whatever you will. So I think that is. I would assume that's how it works in 1984. I think the idea that the inner party is willfully ignorant may be a lie.
Does O'Brien count as part of the inner party? Is O'Brien just a thought police guy, or is he an upper level Ministry of Truth?
And that, like, nobody really knows. I mean, my headcanon would be that he is actually part of the inner party, and the inner party is actually just like a lower middle class schlubs, because of course, like once you get a global society that's run as a socialist state, right? Going back to Thomas Sowell, right? Like how do you produce wealth? Like what is the root of prosperity? It's capitalism, right? So if you do away with capitalism, right, you're going to do away with prosperity, and everybody's going to be poor, even the rich people, right? They're basically going to bomb themselves back into like the 16th century or whatever. So my headcanon is that like he is part of the inner party, but I think they're clever enough that they're able to think for themselves and do for themselves.
So something I want to bring up about O'Brien is when Winston sees O'Brien, he says they got you too, and O'Brien says they got me a long time ago, which strongly implies to me that O'Brien was once a free thinker. The thought police got him, and then there's this obvious question: well, how do you get to be in the thought police if the thought police obviously have to be able to think like heretics in order to catch heretics? And they're one of the only people that are sort of allowed to operate with scientific efficiency, so that they can actually catch wrong thinkers, right? So it seems to me like in order for you to get into something like the thought police, you first have to demonstrate that you understand that you might do some wrong think yourself, and that's how they get you. And if you're smart, like O'Brien, then they'll just turn you and make use of you finding other wrong thinkers out. And I do get some impressions from Winston. So I'm kind of like trusting that Winston is making good observations. So he'll hear O'Brien raving, and I think he has a line like, O'Brien really believed what he was saying. He was not a hypocrite, which gives me the impression that O'Brien really sincerely in his heart believes in the principles of doublethink. And when he does things like throw away the photograph and say there is no photograph, the question we're asking is that just O'Brien knowing he's torturing Winston, or is that sincerely O'Brien really has taught himself to think that way properly, so that he actually believes that the party needs that kind of people? We don't get to see too much of what like the bigwigs do. Like, are they all a bunch of O'Briens, or is O'Brien a special case? So I guess, Punchy, what you're saying is maybe you don't need to have an O'Brien level of commitment to be part of the inner party in this scenario. Yeah, you could just we're using this stuff to just enjoy some privilege at the expense of all of these morons, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what I would think. I mean, I would think that any system that really and truly relies on Ingsoc thought would be self-defeating, right? Because you would easily undermine yourself if you don't have that grasp of logic and rationality. Now, I mean, I guess it's possible, because Orwell makes it clear that this is still a dictatorship in its infancy, right?
They want to develop it further. They eventually want to get to the proles and abolish the proles families too.
They want to move on, but this is still like a generation or two removed from the revolution, right? Winston's old enough that he remembers being a little boy before the revolution happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible that the party simply hasn't got to that point where everybody's going to be so irrational and so devoid of language, because that like the loss of language and the loss of thought is one of the main themes in the book, obviously. Which, I mean, should we get into that? Like the idea.
Sure. Lewis even joked that the appendix, thankfully, is detachable from the rest of the book. Yeah. So Lewis's favorite part was clearly the Newspeak stuff, and he figured you could kind of like leave the rest of it and just focus on that. So
yeah, well, he's a philologist, isn't he? he's
right. One of the characters that Winston debates with about Newspeak is a philologist, and it kind of like neatly underscores that for a philologist, he can get interested in the nerdy aspects of creating Newspeak for people. And it's sort of like, for a nerd, you can get a nerd to ignore the fact that the nerd's doing an evil thing if you get the nerd focused on just how nerdy a thing you're asking.
And that
you
nerd
use
eventually
logic.
gets caught in the dragnet too, because he's too smart.
Yeah, well, it's
I have
again,
I have a great quote on doublethink where Winston explains it. That do you want me to read it because it might just like frame if
Yeah,
we're gonna get
sure.
into doublethink and newspeak. Okay, his mind slid away into
Yeah.
the labyrinthine world of doublethink, to know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which canceled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. So for me, this is like a key paragraph in the whole book, because it's kind of like what is the result of starting with the premise that reality does not have an objective existence. The past does not have an objective existence, and then trying to work that out practically. Most people, they just see the absurdity. They say that's nonsense. I'm not going to do that. And people of a certain intellectual level who believe that you can start with the premise that reality doesn't exist can, through their intellect, arrive at this. Like, I even think they're like two characters that I don't remember their names. One of the characters is sort of a good party member and a working class guy who just believes in what the party says like an animal. And the philologist, Winston suspects he has some subtle way of believing whatever the party tells him. So there's the key quote for new speech. What is it? New speak and doublethink. Yeah.
Doublethink.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so that passage right there, I think you're right, Marm. That is a key passage in the entire book, and it is something that it's describing something that actually exists. You know, it's not just Orwell inventing something for his dystopia. We see out in the world today people essentially engaging in doublethink, right? So you have sexual orientation is inborn and has a biological basis, but sex does not, right? How do you square that circle? That's doublethink, right?
Yeah.
So,
and you might actually, I'd actually be interested in your thoughts on this, right, Geek? Because the Catholic Church gets mentioned by Orwell, and it's sort of like he sees the Catholic Church as a less extreme version of this, which I think if you think about how he's critiquing a secular group, it's sort of like it's like a barb that's going to land, because if you're a bunch of secularists and you just hate religious people and you hate the Catholic Church, being told that you're the Catholic Church but worse really stinks. But it also kind of contains within it Orwell's criticism of the medieval Catholic Church in particular, right? So, like, even if he's sort of comparing the Catholic Church favorably to Big Brother, he still sort of sees in the Catholic Church maybe a prototype of that authority claim. So I don't know. Do you have a papist take on Orwell's view there?
Was it page 120?
My very simple papist take would be that when the Catholic Church does the both and stuff in the theology, they're speaking of God, right? And God is transcendent, above reality. So so you can have both and in that space, right? But I believe, but as a Catholic, I have been taught that our created reality does have an objective aspect to it, right? That it can't just be a subject. So it's, I suppose you could say that in how the Catholic Church speaks of Christ, we can see that aspect of doublethink in the sense of he is 100% Godhead and also 100% man, that's together, right? That the Godhead is three, but also one, right? Seemingly contradictory things, right? But
Catholicism's commitment to truth, creates a way of explaining things like individual rights, right? Whereas for Big Brother, they have maybe the authority claim of the Catholic Church. God is power and Big Brother represents God on earth, but they have no commitment to truth. Therefore, it becomes authority divorced from anything like the Bible or apostolic authority, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So wait, Pancho, you asked me for the page. Were you asking me for the page number of the doublethink quote or the page number of like the medieval church stuff?
For the Catholic Church stuff. I was wondering if it was the one on 120, because that was even the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages was tolerant by modern standards, that kind of thing.
I don't know which version you're looking at. I know that O'Brien mentions it. I've got an ebook and it's mentioned on like page 264 of my ebook, where they talk about like the Catholic Church lasting hundreds or thousands of years. And they're comparing that and saying we want to create something like, we want Big Brother to be like the Catholic Church and last hundreds of thousands of years. It gets brought up a couple times. Even the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages was tolerant by modern standards. Page 259. I think it's all happening in the Ministry of Love stuff chapters.
Yeah, the party is not concerned with perpetuating its blood, but with perpetuating itself. Who wields power is not important, provided that the hierarchical structure remains always the same.
Right. It's not the children of the inner party that inherit the position. I think somewhere it says that you have to take a test to gain admission to the inner party. So maybe it is an IQ technocracy, right? But if you're a dumb kid, you might be kicked down.
Yeah, it's the ever-living corporation. Right? Like Google has its employees, and they come and go, but Google itself will remain forever.
And you must believe that Google is not evil.
So you're talking about this one. I've got it. The essence of oligarchical rule is not father-to-son inheritance, but the persistence of a certain worldview and a certain way of life imposed by the dead upon the living. That's page 1576 in my complete works, but
so all different pages. But
we need some technological overlord to take over the book to make all the page numbers the same. What could possibly go wrong?
Rigid uniformity and all.
Line up no matter what. Yeah, no matter what edition you're looking at. Yeah.
I don't see how that could go wrong.
What was that?
I said I don't see how that could go wrong. But yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because he does bring up religion quite frequently. I mean, the religious sections that sort of jump out the most to me were actually from Animal Farm with Moses the Raven and the Sugar Candy Mountain and stuff, which isn't entirely relevant for 1984, because I'm not sure if like he mentions that there are things like the Catholic Church and Salvation Army left, but he doesn't really dwell on it or make it a central part of his thesis here. So.
Well, the Sugar Candy Mountain thing in Animal Farm, I always read that as Orwell believed that religion. He was kind of looking at it in the Marxian way. The religion is the opiate of the masses. It keeps them calm and sedate and unlikely to rebel against their circumstances.
Oh, that's definitely. Well, I think specifically in the context of Animal Farm, I think he was referencing real world occurrences, because Animal Farm was basically his like diss track against Stalin, and one of the things that I remember Marxists being really salty about when I was in college was the fact that Stalin sort of reversed a lot of the persecution of religion in the Soviet Union. And that especially accelerated in the lead up to World War II and post World War II. But even before that, right, he was allowing the Orthodox Church to kind of come back and letting peasants worship God for a change. So yeah, I think specifically that was his bemoaning the fact that religion was making a comeback in the Soviet Union.
That's another maybe like unresolved question in a lot of classical Marxist thought. I think that I posted a pic the other day, but like anytime a blue check mark quotes Marx, just post a picture of Marx's on the Jewish question and didn't make no additional
Yeah.
Marx kind of thought that, the proles should be free to worship God if they want, right? He thought religion was the opiate of the masses, but maybe we should go ahead and let them have their religion because it'll be good for them to have it if it makes them feel good about themselves. Or should you persecute it out of existence because it's a threat? And I'm guessing, Punchy, you're sort of suggesting that even in like the Big Brother world, that open question still exists. The proles could have religion if they want it, but if you're in the outer party and you mention God, or you allow the word God to not be censored in a book of poems, that right there is a death sentence thought crime.
Well, I think that's the implication. He doesn't really get into it that much, but I know. Hang on, I have to find that again.
While you're looking, Punchy, I just wanted to talk about.
Maybe not. I don't. He doesn't really get into religion, but right. Go.
Yeah, on 1576 too, I have some other highlighted passages which talk about the difference between the party member versus the common prole, right? So we have here this one: what opinions the masses hold or do not hold is looked on as a matter of indifference. They can be granted intellectual liberty because they have no intellect. And a party member, on the other hand, not even the smallest deviation of opinion on the most important subject can be tolerated. A party member is expected to have no private emotions and no respites from enthusiasm. He is supposed to live in a continuous frenzy of hatred of foreign enemies and internal traitors, triumph over victories, and self-abasement before the power and wisdom of the party.
That's why you need your Twitter and your blue check mark and your social credit score, isn't it?
Well, what I was thinking when I was highlighting those is the enforcement of SJ doublethink, so to speak, is most severe against people they perceive to be of their own type, right? So basically the ones that get hit the most by SJ cancel culture are people who are not conservative. They are actually somewhat on the left, or at least left of center, and the SJs consider them of their tribe, so they get attacked more because they are the traitors. They are the members of the outer party. They are the members of the party who are supposed to be adhering to party discipline.
J.K. Rowling and the turf stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or Dave Chappelle and the turf stuff, if you want to go more recent. Yeah.
What really struck me about Dave Chappelle is that Dave Chappelle very much believes in the kind of like theory of the oppression of black people by the police state, right? So a lot of what he says actually dovetails with the social justice oppression narrative, but he doesn't toe the line on LGBTQ issues. No. So he's a persona non grata. There are all these like little fractures in our politics where really these groups and actually I kind of feel this way about like Christian evangelicals and the new emerging, I guess, like the postmodern right. Oh, that was something I wanted us to eventually get to, is this whole theory of the postmodern right. And when Trump got elected, leftists started rereading 1984, and they would, talk about, oh, Trump is going to bring in the Big Brother's Big Brother world for us, right? And people would say that Trump represents a post-truth double-think era. So what was weird about that was some of the leftist intelligentsia seemed to kind of read and either miss the point of 1984, or some of them read it and said, wait a second, why are the socialists the bad guys? What I was getting at is, do you think that, how much does this extend to the right? Because we've been talking about it as a social justice problem. How involved are like the Republicans in the evil space lizard cults? Is it just Democrats who are in the space lizard cults, or all the Republicans in the space lizard cults?
Well, I mean, I've got just one thing real quick with Dave Chappelle.
I think that there are some space lizard Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are space lizard Republicans too, but with Dave Chappelle, because he has been mentioned on several websites I frequent. He's basically Owen Benjamin for black people. If that means anything to you guys.
Yeah,
right?
Right, he used to be on the Steven Crowder show before. He's not on YouTube anymore.
Yeah, he got deplatformed because he said bad things about people with small hats. But Dave Chappelle is that kind of guy. Like, he's always he is a black nationalist, or he's got black nationalist sympathies. But he's also the kind of guy who really hates the NWO. Like, there was that whole incident where he dumped a whole bunch of lucrative contracts and TV show deals and things so that he could go off and live in Africa for a while and reconnect with his ancestors. He basically told Hollywood to go F themselves and made for the hills. So, even within, like, I think there's a tendency, particularly within the right? Like, let's just go to the right for now, see whether we're lizards or you guys are lizards or whatever. I think there is a tendency to kind of reduce everybody that's not within your own certain brand of the right, whether that's like the libertarian right or the Christian right or the ethno-state right or whatever you want to call it, right? To kind of lump everybody else in with the giant horde of SJWs, right? The SJW Mongols clawing at the gates or whatever. But he's in Dave Chappelle's case, like he's very much not that. Like he is a black nationalist in that sense. You could say he's a Wokey, but he's very, very much into. He's more akin to like Alex Jones or Kanye West than anything else, which is something weird because I've been seeing a lot of reactions against Dave Chappelle, right? Like coming out as a TERF and denouncing things and taking off, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, look at this wokey SJW trying to flex his muscles, haha, you picked the wrong side, like all this kind of like dunking on him, and I'm like, hang on, that's not what he's like, right? Like there are nuances to Dave Chappelle's thinking that he's not one of these Google lizards. But yeah, so I definitely think, just in general, have I ever gone on a rant about like left and right? Or is this an appropriate time for that? Or...
I'd be interested, because I had a conversation once with Matt Reese and the Matriarchy about this, and he's made the point that the right-left distinction actually has like a historical root in like French politics, right? And the right in French politics.
It does, but it doesn't. Though. I mean, it does. But do you want to go into it, or do you want me to launch into it?
Well, I was just gonna say, so like the French right essentially wanted to retain some belief in God, and the French left was maybe a bit closer to like the cult of reason, right? Like the church is part of the problem that the revolution needs to get past. The revolution won't be complete until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest. And then maybe like as a counterpoint to that, what's his name? Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy. He's made this great point that the problem with our politics is we have these simple phrases and ideas that we use to simplify the world, because you need that. You can't go through life talking about 80 different subgroups of Marxism all the time. So you just need to just describe them as Marxist, or you'd go nuts. And left-right, I think, it's something you need. It's true in the sense that it does describe a range of beliefs, but you make a mistake if you assume that everybody fits neatly into that. Am I dovetailing with your hot take on right versus left?
Kind of. I mean, I'd actually go further than that. In relation to, because I think I've had that exact same conversation with Matt as well, and my reaction would be that yes, it's true that there was a historical definition for left and right in the context of the French Revolution, but that's in the context of the French Revolution, right? Because left and right is a relative term describing politics contextually relative to a certain observer, right? So if I'm
how right is right, how left is left.
Yeah, that makes sense in the context of, if I am one of the delegates sitting at the tennis court in the lead up to the French Revolution or after the French Revolution or whatever, like in those years, yes, left and right might make sense in that context. But trying to extrapolate that out, which is what people wind up doing with left and right in the modern age, like trying to apply those terms to the modern age, I think is an exercise in futility. And I think because this is kind of a complicated subject, so I think probably the easiest way to illustrate my feelings on this would be to get back to this idea of horseshoe theory, right? Because I know we brought that up, like chat has brought that up in the past. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but my big hot take is that there is no horseshoe theory.
Okay. Now, what's interesting about that is horseshoe theory is an attempt to develop the left-right paradigm further. So what's wrong with horseshoe theory?
Well, it's an attempt. Well, I would see it as an attempt to explain how things happen in the terms of the left-right paradigm. And the thing that I would fire back in is, well, I've been doing some religious reading lately, right? Like, shocking. And I've discovered that there are these two sides on the spectrum, and there are the Catholics on the left, right, and there are the Protestants on the right, and they're completely at odds. They're on different sides.
Okay, now into it.
And the thing is, right, like they believe in completely different things, but it's odd, because if you get like a really devout Catholic, right, and you get a really devout Protestant, both of them believe in Jesus. They both like Jesus, and they both believe in God. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that maybe instead of a line between Catholics and Protestants, there is some kind of a magical horseshoe where if you get far enough into Catholicism or far enough into Protestantism, you will wrap around and you'll start believing in God too. See?
So you basically just set up to you basically just put me in the right geek in a playpen and said, okay, now you two fight, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, but it's weird because you both wind up believing in God, so it must be some sort of horseshoe, right? No, like I don't think that's the case at all.
But is it enough? Okay, so I'm gonna like go forward with the Protestant Catholic quick question. Is it enough if it's just a belief in God, right? Because I think the right geek and I could both agree.
There are differences, right? But I think my point would be that it's not so much a horseshoe, it's that you guys are both on the same point, on a certain aspect of the continuum, right? Like there's not a line of people believing things. There's like a 5-dimensional graph with different points and people believing different things about different propositions. You know, like the 4-axis or the 5-axis graph, and people who, when we use the term left and right, we're often looking at people.
I've got something to say on that.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Do you want to say it now, or do you want me to keep?
I'll let the right geek go, and then I'm kind of, it's sort of like you're still trying to frame the question for us almost. So I'll let you guys go for a bit.
Okay, well, I guess just real quick, because my thinking would be that when we use the terms left and right, Like it's insufficient to describe people's positions. It's hopelessly reductive. And when we're like, well, this is really weird because people on the extreme left and the extreme right, like they all wind up believing the same thing. No, like they are on the same side. They are both authoritarians. You know, on the line of authoritarianism to libertarianism, right? Collectivism to individualism.
I wanted to say
all on the same side. So yeah, I think the horseshoe theory thing.
No, finish what you were saying, and then I will speak.
Okay, yeah, I think like the horseshoe theory thing, right? Like that's not so much
Yeah.
an important, look at the world. It's more that we're confusing ourselves by using left and right and trying to reduce the world to a very simple model that it really doesn't fit into, right?
Okay. Now, as you were describing that, I was kind of tracking. It's sort of like it's the problem of infinite complexity, right? Do you try to describe the world as one? Is everything one, or is everything many? Yeah, the Greeks had this problem. Like some of the Greeks would say, well, maybe all of the world is water. Maybe all of the world is air, right? Because if all of the world isn't one thing, how can you possibly understand it, right? If it's infinite everythings, then you can't possibly navigate through the world because everything's just going to be a bunch of atoms blasting around you. Right, Geek? Were you going to go somewhere?
You're okay, Right Geek? You keep cutting in and out.
I heard Right Geek say okay. Are you trying to talk, Right Geek?
Yeah, I think there might be an issue with Right Geek because I've heard her make quick comments and then she cuts out.
Okay. Right Geek, we might be losing you. Okay.
Oh god, the thought police got out.
So I guess Protestant takeover on the Right Geek show. All right. So I follow a guy named Zero HP Lovecraft. Have you ever encountered him, Punchy?
No, I don't think so. Is it on Twitter?
Yeah, he's on Twitter. He has like a weird username. I think he's one of these postmodern, secular, right-wing guys. All right.
Oh, here we go.
I usually think of things in terms of Thomas Sowell's framework again. That, and I'm sure that is. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I think she's caught in like some kind of time paradox. It sounds like she's responding to things we said like several minutes ago.
Okay.
Let's
enter it in the private chat.
What I was saying is that I usually think of it in terms of Thomas Sowell's framework. Do we perceive human beings as infinitely capable of controlling circumstances, or do we think of human beings as being constrained and therefore no human being has the right to have power over other human beings? So I guess that.
Yeah, something's definitely going on. Sorry, folks.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like Right Geek is talking, and then it cuts out on her.
Was probably.
Right Geek, try to log out and log back in.
Yeah, will that punt us? Maybe we could just restart the stream.
Maybe. I think it's possible for the owner to leave and come back, and it'll still run. Because as long as Right Geek doesn't end the stream, it'll keep running, and she can invite herself back in, essentially.
Okay. All right. Well.
Okay. All right. I think she's gonna try. All right.
Eurasia wins. I claim this for the great, glorious nation of Eurasia.
We're not at war with Eurasia, Punchy. We're at war with East Asia. Okay.
East Asia, then. East Asia. China. Right. Yeah, go China.
So what's interesting to me is that the reason I brought up Zero HP Lovecraft is what you're saying tracks a little with the kind of stuff he would talk about, but he would actually maybe like go even more postmodern than you on it. So his idea, I think one of Zero HP's ideas is that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay.
We were stalling for time to let you get there. All right.
What is 2 + 2?
I think that 4.
Okay. Yes, and you are in time sync as well. So that's good.
Yes. um, what I was trying to say is that Thomas Sowell's division essentially falls along the authoritarian versus libertarian axis, and that's always seen the divide. So, and it is it's obviously an oversimplification, but I do think it is a better framework for classifying belief systems than right left.
Okay. I wanted to throw a curveball at you guys. So what if authoritarian and libertarian as a framework is as limited as right versus left?
Oh yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think it's more instructive than right versus left, since right versus left doesn't actually describe anything immutable and permanent, right? Like left versus right can mean anything to anybody at any time in any context. I think people use that word, like even the same person will use that word in a slightly different way during their own conversations.
Yeah.
Right. So at least authoritarian and libertarian, it has the benefit of meaning something specific. But I would agree that it is reductive, because there are various different forms of libertarianism, various different forms of authoritarianism.
Right. And when you brought up Thomas Sowell's constrained versus unconstrained vision paradigm, I like a paradigm like that better, because it sort of says something specific about what do you believe about human people. Do you believe human nature can be changed? Yeah.
Geek?
Go ahead, Geek.
Are you still with us?
Oh, I was going to say the other thing that Thomas Sowell says, besides setting up that unconstrained and constrained framework, is he says the differences between the two frameworks are not necessarily in their value premises, but how they assume reality functions. So someone who is in the unconstrained vision believes that when there are seemingly unjust results in the world, that is because someone has chosen those results. So therefore, what we need to do is we need to choose differently so we can have different results. Whereas someone that is sitting in the constrained vision framework thinks that yes, there are unjust results in the world. I can see that they appear to be unjust, but nobody chose those results. Those results happen by random chance or by spontaneous order, essentially. And so there's no one we can blame for that. And furthermore, we can't control that necessarily. So he was saying that people in both visions both see that it's a terrible thing that some people have a lot of advantage and some people have a lot of disadvantage. And that does seem very unfair in a primordial sense. But they have different ideas about what that is caused by, and that's what causes them to come to different conclusions.
Okay.
So, but to go back to the Catholic versus Protestant, what distinguishes Catholic and Protestant is not loving Jesus and believing in God and believing in the Trinity, but how we perceive authority, especially.
I'd say authority and authority, exactly. Scripture, and I would say that the sola fide debate was kind of like, what is it? I think R.C. Sproul has some really fancy terminology for it, where he'll say like the historical cause for the Reformation was Tetzel and the indulgence debate, and it's either the formal cause. I don't remember which is which, but then like the authority debate is what makes the split happen, because if there's a division in the Catholic Church and we can't agree on authority, then there's going to be a split. And then sola fide was kind of like a hot button issue that made it a world historical issue. Yeah. So I guess, Punchy, what I like about your question is it's asking us, does the Protestant Catholic divide erase if you zoom back far enough? And I actually think that Right Geek and I could actually both agree that the Protestant Catholic divide is a fundamental truth divide. Can we agree on that, Right Geek?
Yeah, well, I would say that there is a divide between Catholics and Protestants, But my point is that you're both Christians, right? And
All right.
the fact that Christians, you don't need to have a big, weird horseshoe theory to try to explain why Catholics and Protestants both believe in God. You just have to say, oh yeah, well they're both Christians, right? Because that's baked into the position, right? Like the frame of reference that we're using to divide Catholics and Protestants, in some context it may be useful.
All right. In some context, yeah. So in some context, you could say any number of group of people are Christians if they fall under like a set. Like you could generally speaking say Mormons fall into the Christian camp, even if Geek and I would both say they.
Or you could do it with Christians and Muslims, right? You could say like, Christians are so different from Muslims, but yet somehow they both believe in God.
Abraham. But here's the funny thing, though.
They both belong to that same set of things on the set of people that believe in gods versus.
All right.
People
all right.
who
So
don't believe in God.
the problem is, are you oversimplifying truth to the point that you could say yes, it's generally true that it's generally true that the Abrahamic faiths share an interest in Abraham, but then
if you zoom back very far,
because you can zoom back even farther. You can zoom back even farther and say, well, atheists and Christians, we both believe in things. So are we both believers in some kinds of things, right? Right.
Yeah, and I think this is. I think like the main point that I'm making is that I think this is the.
I think that.
Right, like when people use left and right, especially like in an American context, left and right usually means I vote Democrat versus I vote Republican. Right? And that, of course, like the meaning of Democrat and Republican changes, because I know earlier you guys were talking about leftists suddenly reading 1984 during Trump, and that's actually, I mean, most leftists have read 1984, especially if they're old enough to have remembered Bush. Because during the Bush years, they were all reading 1984.
Right. Every time a new president comes in, people read 1984 and say the other guy's
everybody
party.
on the other side sees it, and they're like, "Oh my God, we're living in 1984. Isn't this horrible?" And then as soon as they take power, okay, you know what? It's not so bad. But I think, like, even in an American context, right? Like the meaning of Democrat and the meaning of Republican is constantly in flux. And even if you pin somebody down and you say, okay, you are living in East Johnston, South Virginia or something, and you have this one guy who's a Democrat and he has this exact party position, and you have this one guy who's a Republican and he has this exact party position, and which one do you side with? Like, even in that context, there's still shades of meaning between left and right, and well, what exactly do I mean when I say I'm left?
All right, so it's kind of like the problem of how do you interpret anything? If to interpret something in its context, you're going to need infinite historical data, right?
I think the trouble is people are trying to find all these cosmic patterns, but they're starting from a premise that's way too small and way too inaccurate. So that, like, people are basically just confusing themselves with language, right? Like, we've conditioned ourselves to view the world in terms of left and right, and to think that left and right means something. And maybe in some contexts it does, but that something is so vague and nebulous and imprecise that a lot of times, like, we think that we need to come up with some grand explanation of what it is, when there's actually much simpler explanations, right?
Okay.
Like the usual horseshoe theory, it's not a horseshoe theory, it's just, some people are collectivists, and that's what collectivists do, right? It doesn't matter if you're far right or far left, you are on the collectivist side, and those are fundamental aspects of collectivism. So let's just discuss that instead of left and right? So
even if the different collectivist groups see themselves as totally fundamentally
they might
to one
see
another.
themselves as, well, this is something that what was it, Rothbard, or the Road to Serfdom, or was it the other one?
I've read the Road to Serfdom. I haven't read Rothbard, so if you kind of generally remember it, I might remember.
Road to Serfdom is Hayek.
Road to Serfdom was Hayek. One of these two. There was a section. God, I really wish I had this. I sound like an idiot quoting something I don't even remember.
A book somewhere says something like that.
A book somewhere in the archives that hasn't been unveiled yet. it says something to the effect. I'm pretty sure it was Rothbard. It's probably Rothbard, but he says basically that the reason why communists and fascists were fighting each other so badly was because they were both competing for the exact same audience, right?
Mhm.
Like it's like Sega and Xbox, right? You never or PlayStation and Xbox rather. Right, like you see gamers hate each other, PlayStation, Xbox, rah rah rah. Let's fight each other. And the reason that people get so worked up about it is because you're in the same market. You're the same people, and you're going to go for Xbox or PlayStation, right? So the people who are kind of running the show and looking for converts to PlayStation or Xbox, they're going to get you fighting against the other team.
Sega does with Nintendo.
Yeah, Sega and Nintendo, that kind of stuff, Coke and Pepsi. So that's kind of baked into like the reason why communists and fascists used to get in street fights, or even today with like Antifa and Proud Boys or something, right? Like the reason why they fight each other so badly is because they have very much the same sort of mindset and similar agendas. There are some specifics that differ. Again, like with communists, they think that classical communists think that class divides people. Classical fascists think that race divides people. Nowadays, everyone thinks race divides people. It's just whether you're in favor of your own race or in favor of everybody else's race. It's like classical fascists versus postmodern fascists, basically. But yeah, so I think in that sense, yeah, they do fight each other. There are differences. I'm not trying to say there aren't differences.
Well,
but
to steer this
main
back to
difference is they're all collectivists.
Okay, all right. You could say that Protestantism is a type of collective. We've got to stop the Catholics from taking over our Protestant village. So the Protestants
you're all
arm up.
Christians.
Well, to steer this back,
you're all Christians, and you all believe in Christ, and that's why historically there was such conflict between them, because they're trying.
And it's a heated conflict, you're saying, because they're actually competing on a similar ground. Like if it was Catholics versus Zoroastrians, they might not. Catholics might not care about Zoroastrians
we essentially share.
Yeah.
We essentially share the same value premises.
You're all right, right? You're cutting out again.
I heard the same value premises and cut off after that.
Nothing.
Poor Reiki, it's gotta be on Wi-Fi.
Can you guys hear me at all?
I can hear you.
I heard that. I heard, can you guys hear me at all? And then nothing. Tapping, that's probably Mama Dude.
I'm typing, sorry.
Okay, yeah, you type the things to it. It's probably the Google lizard. Your telescreen is.
They heard a couple too many buzzwords, and they decided that this string has to go down the memory hole.
But yeah. So again, it's not so much. I'm not so much interested in Catholics versus Protestants. That's
all right.
That's just an illustration of my point.
Then,
so kind of like Christians.
Right. So tying into this problem, if you get into this problem where Antifa could be a collective and right-wing, white nationalists could be a collective, so can we just talk about them both as types of collectivists? Well, isn't that going to be...
Just talk about them as types of collectivists.
All right, isn't it going to be a different type of... Isn't that just simplifying in an opposite direction, right? So instead of simplifying them in a left-right dimension, let's simplify them in a individualist collectivist dimension, right? Like if any group could get infinitely complex the more you look at it, or infinitely simple the farther you zoom out away from it. How do you talk about anything? It's almost like this is a Big Brother problem, right? Like the old world is so full of shades of meaning and complexity. It's so much nicer if you can just subtract all the words and get just 6 words to mean everything.
Yeah, well, this is why, like, I think I have all these sympathies towards logical positivism and the kind of the old guard progressives. But I do think it is simplified, but it's simplified in a way that's more accurate and more logically consistent for the context in which we're speaking, right? Like we can describe them in various other ways, right? Like you should always be cognizant that well, I'm saying collectivist versus individualist, but that's not the only thing that's going on, right? Like I'm not saying you shouldn't be cognizant of other things,
Okay.
but I think if you're going to describe these groups and you want to talk about these groups, instead of taking like this very vague, almost newspeak terminology like left and right, and then trying to wrap your head around, oh god, like why is this? No, just cut that out. Just be like, okay, we're going to discuss the commonalities of collectivism now and how that relates to commonalities of individualism. Right?
Okay.
Then
All right. Why
well.
not substitute individual and collectivist for the left-right paradigm entirely?
Because people don't.
All right.
That's the problem. I mean, language is like I guess we could get into language, but language is constantly evolving, right? Language is simply a means of communicating between people, and it only exists in the sense that
if
we
it
have
had
signs.
singular meanings, it'd be only dead languages don't change.
Yeah, exactly. Like languages correspond to signs. They're signs that signify certain ideas, and it's constantly changing.
Which is something that the postmodernists take advantage of, because then the postmodernists can say, well, then therefore anything could mean anything, right?
Yeah,
why even worry about attaching any objective meaning to any phrase?
But I would say, like, my pushback to that is that the signs might be able to mean anything, but signifiers don't necessarily change their meaning. So, like, if you call a like a Dadaist thing, right? Like where you have a picture of a bicycle and you say this is a cat or something like that, right? Like you could say that. You could say this is a cat, but it wouldn't mean that bicycle is a cat. That bicycle is still what I would call a bicycle. You're simply changing
or a picture
the sign.
of a bicycle. Yeah.
Yeah, and like if everybody decided like, oh, that's a cat now, right? Like, yeah, okay, we can call bicycles cats from now on.
All
but we
right. So
still
there's a difference.
mean
So there's
the
a
same.
difference between if the first caveman to look at a cat looked at it and said, "Ugh, bicycle," then bicycle would be the word
That would be
for
the
cat.
word. Yeah,
Right,
there's
but-
a difference between the word and the thing that the word signifies.
Yeah, yep, exactly. The mental picture I have in my head of a cat when I point. Well, I guess NPCs don't have mental pictures in their heads, right? But
Or Unshat, or Neko or something,
Yeah.
right? Like Neko is a cat, right? It's a different
Right.
word completely, but the picture that we both have is roughly the same cat, right?
oh, okay. The
Okay.
poor
Right,
Geek, she's written a comment. Here back to the book. The quote I read a while ago about the party versus the proles applies to what we're discussing regarding fascists and communists being similar. And then she hid the comment. Here it is.
Correctly, that people are more likely to hate their neighbor than that guy way over. Yeah, exactly. That's
Okay.
that's kind of what Rothbard or maybe Hayek or whatever this old thinker Goldstein guy was getting at.
Okay.
It's
So is
it's easy to
Goldstein
find-
an individual? Is Goldstein an individualist? Right?
well,
Because
I mean, is Goldstein? Does he even exist? I mean, I
right,
think
he could.
I think like getting away from the sort of meta, like what is it in the book. I think that Goldstein was meant to represent like a kind of libertarian socialist perspective.
So do you
Right,
think
like
he's
kind
anything?
of
Do you
a
think he's
Trump-
supposed to maybe have any like real historical? Like if Big Brother feels a little bit like Stalin, is there anyone in the communist movement like Trotsky or something who could
Well-
tap onto Goldstein?
I mean, the thing is, like, I actually had to do some research into this because I know a lot of people have tried to denounce Orwell as a Trotskyite. That was very de rigueur back in the day.
Yeah.
Apparently, Orwell didn't like Trotsky either.
Okay.
He thought Trotsky, because my perspective on Trotsky was that the reason why there were so many Trotskyites who thought that Trotsky would have been better was simply because Trotsky wasn't the winner, right? Like if
Right, he
history
died,
had
so he
been
gets to
different-
die a romantic hero.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's a romantic hero, kind of like Shay or something, right? Like if he had have come to power, people would have seen him quite differently, I think.
Right.
And apparently, this is also what Orwell was saying. I think Orwell was more kind of along the lines of like the anarchist, like the Marxist anarchists. Because I know they used to get in fights a lot with the Stalinists during the Spanish Civil War, which I think anybody listening to this should really check into the Spanish Civil War, because it'll help you with the current American Civil War that's going on, right? It's the Carlists versus the fascists versus the army, versus just kind of traditionalists versus anarchists versus national syndicalists versus the Stalinists. I mean,
and read, Right Geek says, and read Orwell's Homage to Catalonia. All right.
Yeah, well,
so I want to bring back, since we have the Right
anarchist
Geek in the chat. All right, I want to tie something Right Geek said about Soul's framework with your individualist collectivist framework. So the connection I see, one of the reasons I like Soul's framework better than a right versus left framework is it's pointing to something to human nature and saying there are certain things in human nature you can't tweak or fix. And the belief that you can tweak or fix anything in human nature results in the unconstrained vision. So you could parallel the constrained vision with individualism, and you could parallel the unconstrained vision with collectivism. But even though they parallel, they're talking about maybe like two different aspects of the question, right? So you just believe that individualism and collectivism is a better framework than left versus right, period, to talk about these issues, right?
About those sort of issues that would be relevant, yes, I think
okay.
It's much better. It's not every single issue, right? But for the issues that relate to individualism versus collectivism, I think you should dump left and right and go for individualism versus collectivism. Are
you familiar with Thomas Sowell's like constrained and unconstrained vision yourself, or just through like Right Geek and me and I quoting
just through Right Geek? I mean, I do know Sowell, but I mean that is an idea that's come up previously. Like Sowell's not the first person to articulate it,
right?
I don't know offhand. Like I'd have to dig around through notes and stuff to find it. But yeah, I think that could be very valuable as well. Especially in the context of all these utopian novels, since I think that that does get to the heart of what these people kind of go for.
So I've often felt like I've never liked the term SJW because it always feels too simplified for me, but I have kind of liked SJW jokes. So maybe bringing the Pearls back into it. The Pearls make memes, and the Pearls simplify the meme to the simplest and funniest idea. So do the Pearls have to be educated out of talking and thinking that way, or does it just not matter if they make their silly memes that use the traditional political?
Does it matter to whom? I guess.
Right.
That would be the question. Like to the Pearls. I mean, I have to struggle sometimes because I grew up around people who were very intelligent, right? And I'm somewhat intelligent, and you guys are all fiercely intelligent, right? Everybody listening to this is fiercely intelligent.
Well, you're the only one who's read about the Spanish Civil War, but go ahead.
No, well, that's not intelligence. That's education. and that's not even education. I mean, that was actually mostly because I really like Hearts of Iron, and I always want to like role play my Hearts of Iron games, so I've got to go and read about the Spanish Civil War because that always screws up every single game of Hearts of Iron. But yeah, like I came from an environment where everybody was fiercely intelligent, so I always assume that everybody is just as intelligent, if not way more intelligent than I am. So when we get to something like, you got to be precise and logical about your language, like I'm just assuming that everybody's going to do that. So maybe that's wrong. Maybe I'm overly optimistic about people. I guess like in the context of the proletariat, right? Like maybe it doesn't matter quite so much whether they're using left and right, because if that helps them, sure. But I think for people who are capable of holding, like sophisticated conversations about ideas and values and premises, I think that people should be like the middle party, basically. Middle party and inner party.
Would right and left still have validity if we were talking about something like nation versus international sentiment? So is the right more nationalistic and the left more internationalistic?
What do we mean? Like, are we talking about the left and right as American, like Democrat versus Republican?
All right. So you're probably even if you try to like pin something down on the right or the left, you think they can't be pinned down even enough to
it's so
attach an idea to it.
There's so many different meanings to left and right. Like
so so would you just rather than say nationalist versus internationalist and not even like associate it with right and left?
Yeah, and then you can tag that on to other things. So you can say you're like a collectivist nationalist or a collectivist internationalist or something. You know.
All right.
I don't see how it would function. Like before I could even discuss how internationalism versus nationalism works on the left-right scale, we'd have to settle on what the left-right scale is. And
okay.
There's so many different meanings. I mean,
sometimes I feel like if there's another divide could be like the intellectual elite versus like the regular Joe, right? Like that's a common divide or framework. But then you could say, well, what about people in the middle? How do they fit into that? Is it
yeah? I mean,
IQ?
I think most meme lords, right? Like when they like internet culture, when it uses left and right, usually what they mean is, you know, the sort of soy cucks from the coastal cities versus the kind of based kids from everywhere else, everywhere outside the coastal cities. And so in that context, like maybe you could make some descriptions, but it's very vague. Right?
All right. I always feel like the common man's perspective has a kind of value where even if it's just like Joe Six-Pack, and I'm actually kind of like just using all of these, you know, catchphrases and buzzwords that suggest the type of person, but it's sort of like, I think that ordinary person's perspective has value. So if an ordinary person conceives of something in a certain way, I kind of want to adopt that perspective at times, even if I don't like it. So I've often said I don't like the right-left paradigm, but I'll use the right-left paradigm because that makes sense to you've kind of like questioned, well, what does it even mean? But it's sort of like, even if nobody is 100% sure what it means, it makes sense to a lot of people. It produces a mental picture for them.
Well, I mean, if we're going to talk about like this is kind of I guess like a proselytizing thing or something, like preaching to people. You've got to be able to reach them, right, in a language that they understand. And if those people because I think earlier I was making this point, right? Like left and right are contextually dependent terms. It only makes sense in the sense that you're using that term at that exact moment.
Right. So SJW as a phrase, you know, what does that mean philosophically, right? And then you can just get more and more and more and more specific and get more and more strict about your definition of SJW. Or you could just say, well, yeah, you say the word SJW to your cousin who doesn't follow politics, and instantly they have a picture in their head of what an SJW is. How do they get that picture,
if
right?
If
it doesn't mean anything. If
we're having a conversation, right, with a specific person at a specific time, and they have an understanding of what they think left and right means, and I know what they think left and right means, right? In that case, yeah, all right, you know, you can have an agreed upon meaning, and you can use left and right in that context to describe that thing. I mean, my issue is that left and right is so vague that it's impossible.
So I think I'm tracking with you. So I'm going to throw my, I guess, like postmodern right think piece idea at you again. Or I'll put it in my terms. So I'm rereading Mises' liberalism, and he means classical liberalism, right? Like European libertarianism. And so so in one of his early chapters, he talks about the 300 Spartans and King Leonidas. The right geek. Let me finish this thought, and then I'll read that. So he says, you know, Leonidas, the reason we admire Leonidas is that he's fighting for liberty. And my immediate thought as I was reading that is, well, can you really describe the ancient Spartans as libertarian, right? Like if you weren't born a strong, healthy baby, you weren't really going to have a good place in Spartan society. So maybe a weakness of libertarianism is what happens if libertarian weed smokers aren't, you know, strong, muscular Spartans who are ready to go out and fight the Persians to protect Sparta. Right?
Yeah, well,
so this is, I think, one of the maybe like right-wing authoritarian critiques of libertarianism is maybe libertarianism or classical liberalism doesn't produce the kind of moral fiber you need to fight to defend liberty. Maybe like there's this irony that you need a little bit of authoritarianism, or you need a little bit of discipline and collectivism just to give you enough to fight for, so that you can go fight for liberty. Like,
so like
do you track with that at all?
Do you mean like the Team America Dicks and Pussies an asshole speech?
I've never seen Team America.
Oh, okay, yeah. See if you can find the Dicks, Pussies, and Assholes speech. It's basically like Citizen Sheepdog. Maybe that might sheepdogs and wolves and citizen sheepdogs. That was kind of popular back like.
Oh, okay. So like every citizen has to help. Yeah, I got you. So like every citizen has to be vigilant and do their part to protect freedom, right?
Yeah. Well, not necessarily every citizen, but the basic idea is that. Most people are just normal, nice people. There are predatory people, but you need predatory people who are morally guided in order to defend the rest of society from bad people. Like it's very popular in the military.
Bad times create strong men create good times create movement.
Well, kind of. I guess it could be related to that, but it's more that like strong men are necessary to keep the soft men happy.
Right. So does that kick libertarianism in the teeth a bit? That problem?
I don't think it does. I mean, again, like libertarianism is so broad, and there's so many different things you can go into, like agorism, for example. But I think it's perfectly possible to have a libertarian society and be robust and capable of defending yourself and your loved ones and things.
The manly virtues can coexist.
Oh yeah, definitely. But my issue with Sparta would be that Sparta wasn't libertarian at all. I mean, it was very collectivist and authoritarian.
Yeah.
Greece was, a
little more democratic.
Yeah, well, kind of. It was
still had
democratic
slaves.
and Republican. They were fighting for their own decentralized nature, though. I think that's the essence of Greek liberty, right? Like when you get right down to it, because I am a voluntarist. Like politically, I would describe myself as a voluntarist version of libertarians. Are you guys familiar?
So you could voluntarily enter into a community, right? You could say voluntarily, I want to be part of the Greeks, and that means I fight the Persians because the Persians are threatening my people who are the Greeks, right?
Yeah,
but you're still voluntarily participating in that culture and that society.
Well, I think that the only fair and just bonds of government, right? Like if you're going to enter into a contract with somebody, a social contract with somebody, it has to be through consent. And the only social contracts that have any kind of justice or basis to them are ones issued through mutual consent. And Reagan says
go ahead.
Belief that government can do very little, I think. I kind of agree with that, but again, as a voluntarist, one of the interesting things about voluntarists in general, myself specifically, but some other voluntarists as well, is that because you believe that government is a product of consent, you can in fact consent to tyranny, right? Like if somebody wanted to be a Spartan, wanted to be a slave, one of the libertarian like ANCAP voluntarist position would be that you can be a slave if you consent to it, right?
Okay.
Like somebody can't come up to you and be like, hey, you've got to be a slave, you've got to be an SJW, you've got to be a blah 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 blah, you've got to be a cowboy.
So a Big Brother society could exist so long as someone can volunteer to enter into it or leave it.
Hot take, I would be absolutely okay with Big Brother if it was small and everybody in it did so voluntarily, right? Like kind of the 1970s with their weird hippie communes. Like I would not want to join one of those things. I actually part of my childhood was spent in a weird hippie commune because of my mother, so I really don't want to have anything to do with weird hippie communes. But if you want to do something like that, or if you want to go join a monastery, or if you want to build a great city underneath the sea and then turn it into an awesome FPS game, whatever you want to do.
Christian Republic,
have a Christian Republic like that. As long as it's consensual, as long as everybody involved in that society consents to it, I think that's fine. And
So
because that's impractical.
One of the problems you run into,
Yeah.
what if you run out of land to go make
Yeah,
your
I mean,
own
there's a
country?
lot of impractical things, which is
Yeah.
why, in general, I tend towards like limited government libertarianism as, you know, like a
Practical.
compromise, like a
You
practical.
need some kind of practical thing that works. Okay.
But I think, like, philosophically, I would say that in the ideal system where everybody is able to pursue their...
But getting back to the
Yeah, okay, getting back to the foot, sorry.
right,
Agorism,
keeping us honest in the chat.
Did you want to get into agorism? Because this was something that kind of dovetails with what I'm talking about.
I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of agorism until you mentioned it in this stream.
Okay, well, here's the thing. Trauma, right? Fear and trauma and COVID. All right, so I think one of the things that maybe gets overlooked a lot is the role of fear and trauma in IngSoc and Big Brother maintaining their control over the British people, right?
Okay.
Would you agree? I mean, the whole like...
Yeah, Winston's literally traumatized by his hazy memories of what happened to his mother and sister. He's traumatized by his own choices, like hiring the prostitute, and then towards the end, he gets traumatized on purpose repeatedly.
Gets tortured, and that is what breaks him. That is what gets him to embrace Big Brother and to really, you know, internalize the messages of the party.
And it really wasn't until they got him with the rats. It was when they got him on the one fear that they knew was his one fear that they got his soul. Like, they got even his thinking, but he was holding on to his love for Julia as his last little shred of something.
You have love. Like, love was what was going to save him. Love is what brought him to the light, so to speak, like got him out of Plato's cave and seeing the world for what it was. But then fear was what dragged him back down and what broke him. Mm-hmm. Now, I hope nobody deplatforms me for this, but there was something that I was that you actually were talking about the other day, Big Brother fan on Twitter, is this pornpocalypse idea.
Okay.
Right? And are you're familiar with it, right? Like the eBay.
Is it the idea that there's been like an explosion in the porn field, and that porn has kind of like porn's had political implications, right?
Well,
like
I mean, there's that, but more specifically is these recent developments where like banks have been trying to put pressure to cut off funding to websites that peddle in pornography. OnlyFans was a big thing. They wound up backing down, and then there was eBay with like there's this big conspiracy theory on the left right now that Christians are trying to eradicate gays from the internet. Do you remember that?
Right. Okay. I didn't remember that specifically, but I have seen some. Yeah. Why is the secular authority anti-porn? I got you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like,
basically,
do the lizards want us to look at porn, or do the lizards not want us to look at porn? Basically, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go with it, but for me specifically, what I was thinking about it was like, again, I'm very libertarian, right? I'm very easygoing. I do believe in this idea called agorism, which is it's not well defined. It's kind of like a handful of wingnut libertarians have come up with it, and they posted it on like conspiracy theory blogs. But basically, it's the idea that the market can serve as a moral actor, right?
Okay.
And what I mean by that, it's kind of what Orwell was getting into in that section that I think Right Geek was bringing it up. Rats, this gets into the connection, some sort of discuss contagion and totality. Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that
Peterson
that
talks
also,
about that. Yeah, discuss
that
sensitivity.
links into like toxicity, like the idea that evil things are toxic now, and all the insane stuff going on about like vaccines and things. That would be a whole nother discussion. But just real quick, I'm gonna stick with agorism in the porn for like a couple minutes. But basically, the idea is that if the party, like if Big Brother forbids you things, right, there will be a black market or a gray market that pops up to give you these things anyways, right? Like to help you with liberty. So if Big Brother says, hey, you can't listen to Jordan Peterson anymore because he said he used the wrong pronoun when he described that man over there, and that man's really a woman, so now you can't watch Jordan Peterson podcasts anymore. The sort of the market dark web, the economic dark web will step in and be like, here is your Jordan Peterson, and agorism is basically
download his videos, hear them, do some weird stuff to get past the YouTube copyright system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
all these kind of ways that you do, like usually people see that as somehow like transgressive or bad. Sticks we noticed between. Yeah. Well, I think that's actually something that's been brought up by a lot of different historians. I think Hobsbawm used to talk about that, if I remember correctly. But
discuss sensitivity, right?
Yeah, discuss sensitivity is one of those things that the major indicator of people that are predisposed towards totalitarianism. But yeah, so agorism is basically this idea that the black markets in INGSOC can serve as a moral agent, right? Are you tracking with that? Like, would you agree with that?
All right, so the
market,
Big Brother has
itself.
an anti-sex attitude, but the black market, I guess.
Or just
wait a second.
market.
But they create porn. Maybe it doesn't quite. I don't know if it quite fits with your parallel because they create porn for the proles, but they.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, in that sense, but anything that Big Brother unfairly and unjustly deprives you of, that Big Brother says you can't have it.
Then the black market provides a moral service when they provide the things that Big Brother can't provide.
Or it doesn't even necessarily have to be a black market, but just any kind of market can provide the things that the state denies you, and that in itself is a moral act.
All right, so would the agorism idea be if the state denies something and you provide it as a service, you're engaging in kind of like a moral
everybody
resistance?
should be allowed to get whatever services they want as long as it's consensual, and the market should be able to provide that. So that's basically where I'm coming from on the eBay thing, right? So
all right.
I'm philosophically predisposed to supporting the sort of gay porn smut peddlers on eBay who are aghast by eBay shutting down the trade in old gay porn books, right?
Now, what's interesting about that, so I keep hearing this sort of classic conservative libertarian fight where a kind of libertarian argument is, well, Twitter is a private corporation, so they should be able to ban whoever they want to ban, right? So how does agorism solve the problem of a voluntary free corporation banning a bunch of stuff that they think people should be able to access, right? What happens if Twitter or eBay's freedom to ban
you'd have to
competes with?
You'd have to ask any individual agorist. I'm sure they'll all come up with different answers. My answer would be that it shouldn't ban it, because I'm very much like a supporter of the kind of like Silk Road kind of things. That might be a dated reference now. I'm very anti-drug. I'm very, I'm moderately anti-porn. Like I don't think you should do bad things. I think you should live a virtuous life. But philosophically, I believe that people should be allowed to live these unvirtuous lives. Like that.
Right.
That's basically my point here. And anyways, but before we get too far off track, what I think was really interesting tying into 1984, right, is that I have this incredibly libertarian, incredibly degenerate, eBay should allow you to sell like starving African children if you want. Like that was actually the first eBay listing I ever remember as a kid, was finding a listing for a box full of African children and thinking it was the best thing in the world.
No, wait, wouldn't that violate the bodily autonomy?
Not necessarily. Not if the African children wanted to be sold in the box. If they consented to it, that's fine. But I'm very much of the mind that anything goes. eBay should sell anything at all. It's terrible. It's bad. But we've come to this. We've come to this point in society, right, where like I've been raised in a very LGBTQ friendly environment. But it's become such a hot button issue, and it's become so clannish and divisive, right? Like, if you're not with the LGBTQ, you are the enemy. You're a Nazi. You're a fascist. Blah 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 blah. Right? Like, you know how it's been.
Yeah.
It's been a constant, relentless attack on heterosexuality, cissexuality, normal genders, gender roles, all this stuff. Years and years and years of this kind of thing just wearing down my psyche. You know, being worried, like, hey, if I go out and I'm like, yeah, I called someone a he because he is a he, am I gonna get a bike lock from Antifa to the back of the head?
Yeah.
Kind of thing, right? Like, I'm absolutely, like, I don't think I'm terrified, but it's internalized that kind of fear. So when I saw these articles written by these kind of SJW, or what I perceive as SJW gay men, bemoaning the loss and erasure of homosexual society, my first reaction wasn't, oh, that's terrible. My first reaction was, yeah, get fucked.
All right. And there's a dimension to it where,
kill 'em all.
like, they were a lot of SJWs. So I'm using the term advisedly. So a lot of the same people who were cheering when, you know, like, internet anti-SJWs were getting shut down, suddenly get upset when the stuff they like gets shut down.
Now they're getting shut down, and again, philosophically, like, morally, I've got all these elaborate arguments for why you shouldn't shut down and this guy might not even be an SJW. This guy might just be, you know, some old gay pervert, you know, like the kind of guys that I love. You know, they're great, old gay perverts, great. But my first reaction, like my emotional reaction, my gut reaction was, yeah, get fucked. I hope you suffer, you know, you SJW scumbags, get deplatformed.
All right.
And that's not the only time that's been happening a lot lately, I've noticed. And that's happening to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Schadenfreude, right? I think we're getting back. I keep getting back,
but it's deeper than that, though. It's deeper than just Schadenfreude. Like, I'm not so much reveling in their pain.
You're starting to feel an enemy. You're starting to feel an enemy-friend distinction for people you're not even sure you're enemies with.
And I'm starting to associate with the kind of Google lizards and these banks, because this thing about the banksters shutting down people, that was what they were doing to, like, the alt-right. You know, PayPal and
right.
Exact same.
You can't use cash anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that's been brought up in conspiracy theory circles since like 2008 or something. Because this has been floating around in think pieces for globalists for decades now. So it's something that I know. I have a lot of context to be like, this is
like if social credit became a substitute for cash, then being a political outlier could mean, we're not gonna, maybe we won't show up and shoot you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
just what the right.
It's like you want the dumb people who support these things to feel the pain of their dumb shit idea. All right,
and it's because of that trauma. It's because, and that's the only thing I can think. It's because I've got so accustomed to being attacked and to feeling fear and to feeling like the rats are about to gnaw my face off.
I have a parallel. Yeah, I have a parallel where, like, I've always perceived myself as, like, I'm the weird liberal in the fundamentalist circle, right? Where I'm actually in the fundamentalist circle, but they all know I'm the liberal one in the fundamentalist circle, right? So I just love letting people live their own lives, and then when I get railroaded, it's sort of like, the more I get railroaded, the more bitter. I know exactly. So in my life experience, the strongest example I can think of is, I never thought of the fact that I was a white person. Like, that didn't even occur to me until I had weirdos getting into my face on the bus and calling me a white devil, and then I suddenly am aware of the fact that I'm a white person, when me being a white person is bad.
Same thing.
Okay, yeah, there's this weird, I guess, blowback effect where, like, I've sensed it. I've things, poor Zoomers, I feel like things felt a little calmer in the 90s, and the stereotypical like Republican and Democrat swapping shit at the water cooler and letting each other having it, but being buddies. I feel like that thing could exist in the 90s, and I think we're basically getting to the point where you can't imagine that existing more and more in the modern context, and at the political level, like AOC will talk about her political rivals as evil people. We don't need to be factually correct. We need to be morally correct.
There's been articles published lately where they're like, well, we don't have to understand the right anymore. They're just destroy them. And I definitely think that's true. That is where we're at, and I think it's a product of this relentless campaign of terror that's been directed against us, right? 9/11.
But what if that's a normal state? What if that's a normal state for people, not a weird state for people, right? Like, what if we're all like, the more you go through history, the more every group and every.
I don't think. Well, this would kind of get to Hobbes and Locke, right? Have we gone through like Hobbes and Locke yet?
Let me. I want to. Let me look at Right Geek. She's seen the same thing in education. I wouldn't mind seeing pink-haired SJW teachers tarred and feathered. So I see this connection. Yeah. The longer we're in it,
right? Like philosophically, if you sat me down and said, "Hey, would it be a good idea to tar and feather pink-haired SJW teachers?" I'd be like, no, that would be even if they're teaching something I don't like.
So it's almost like a democratic form of the 2 minutes hate, right? Where Big Brother decides who's the topic of the 2 minutes hate.
Yeah, he decides who you hate, who you fear, and then that's the group that you start fighting against, right?
Right, but then hate can also emerge spontaneously or organically without the powers that be deciding it, maybe.
I'm not so sure it's spontaneous and organic in this case. I'm kind of putting my Alex Jones out there a little bit. All right. I think a lot of this
could there be social conditioning to make you feel that?
Yeah, right. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that at least part of this is by design. That people at the top do know what they're doing, and they have been doing it. But either way, whether or not this is by design or by accident, conspiracy or coincidence theorists, whichever one you want to say, I mean, it is what it is. Like, people are becoming more desensitized, and they are starting to hate each other and fear each other, and it's being driven by this fear. And like COVID and the lockdowns, I mean, I had COVID very early. It was really scary because we didn't know at that time really what the disease would do to you. I had to get quarantined from all my loved ones.
Yeah.
It sucked for a couple of weeks. And I had some pre-existing healthcare conditions, and I had veterans healthcare, which is horrible in the start. So it is pretty terrifying. Like, everybody's stressed out, and that stress leads to more hate. And even if you are the kind of person who has these kind of philosophical rationales, like if you can rationalize to yourself why liberty is important, right? Like, I think Winston could do that. Like, he was getting to the point where he could rationalize to himself why his liberty is valuable, why you need a free society, why you need like democratic socialism in the way that Orwell perceived it. But all that went away when it was just him and the rats. Right?
Yeah.
And I think like with Hobbes and Locke, right? This is another one of these like proposed divisions between people.
All right, so Hobbes and the Leviathan. He has a strong view of the state, and the state, because life in the Middle Ages was nasty, brutish, and short. You kind of need the state to protect us from that, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's about the state, but I think the most important point is it's about human nature, right? About whether human beings are essentially good or whether human beings are essentially evil.
Right.
Like, if you leave humans to their own device, will they choose to be good or will they choose to be evil? And
right. I was trying to get at that with this like hate thing. Is, well, what if hate is actually kind of a normal problem for humanity throughout history, and it's not just a modern problem? This is why Oceania maintains continuous warfare too. I think constant bombing keeps people in that state of terror and makes them more pliable.
To maintain you always got to see the news that's saying there's been a school shooting, there's been a Muslim that killed somebody, there's been a fascist rally, the Antifas are doing something, right? It's constantly fear. Russia's attacking Ukraine,
All right.
China's attacking India.
All right, so Antifa could be a legitimate problem, but Antifa could also be a cable news
But the
phenomenon.
perception of Antifa is being pushed on people, right, as a danger. Danger. Oh no, my house might get burned down by a rampaging Antifa, right? And I'm saying this as somebody who's ideologically opposed yet weirdly.
Right. Well, and I've noticed the phenomenon that when Biden gets elected, suddenly I don't see any more news about cities burning down. What happened? Yeah.
I actually saw an article that said no cities were burned down and that no fire was going on the other day, which was just 1984, but it's real stuff. But yeah, oh god, we were talking about Hobbes and Leviathan, right?
Hobbes and Locke,
yeah, Hobbes and Locke, because Hobbes, his premise is that people are essentially evil. That when people are left to themselves, they will choose to do bad things, and in order to keep people from doing bad things to one another, we need what he called the Leviathan, right? It's in reference to the biblical Leviathan, the great horrible monster. And that is the state, or in his time, it was specifically the king, right? Like we need the king, we need the nobility, and these people will guide you and keep you on the path to. And
one of the problems you run into is if people are bad, then the king could be bad. But
I mean that's something he conveniently left out.
But Locke has a similar problem where, well, if people are good, then why not have a good king, right? Because if people are basically good, then the king could be basically.
Yeah, well, I mean, then you get is it going to be if people are good, people don't need the king. Right? I think that would be the pushback. Yes, you could have a good king, but people wouldn't necessarily need the king, because this is why Locke, he thought people were essentially good, and that left to their own devices without somebody telling them what to do, they would spontaneously organize into cooperative groups, right? Like this is the kind of the liberal perspective. This is the anarchist perspective, which oddly enough. Antifa doesn't seem very.
I know Locke is important. I know Locke is important in classical liberal thought. Is he? Would you call him like a proto-anarchist, or would that be projecting on him?
I think anarchists would be in that Lockean tradition, because anarchy only makes sense in that context, that people will spontaneously organize. Because the whole point of anarchy. Anarchy as classical anarchy. I think the Antifa anarchy, quote unquote, quote air quotes with the fingers kind of thing.
More like T.H. White's Once and Future King. He has, he says, we should be anarchists like the goose. Now the problem is that people aren't like geese, so we need something more complex for humanity that's I think the goose's style of it.
I think in the context of Antifa and Black Bloc and all these kind of revolutionary guard groups, I think anarchist is just code for socialist, tanky, and denial, right?
Right.
I think they're just young kids who get sold
my
on
favorite
anarchy.
My favorite clip is someone, I think Andy Noor, someone asks a tanky, what will you do with fascists? And he just says, well, there will be no fascists. I'm an anarchist. Just conveniently, the people who disagree with me will cease to exist magically.
Yeah, I mean, they're not anarchists at all. They're actually any more than SJWs or liberals. But I'm speaking specifically about sort of classical anarchism and the kind of anarchism like the Hobbits might have in Lord of the Rings.
Right. I'm glad you went there, because then it's Hobbit society is so wonderful. I want to live in Hobbiton, but then they're not prepared for when Sauron comes, right? So if you have your anarchist idyllic society, and then Big Brother comes and conquers your libertarian idyllic society, how do you defend the libertarian idyllic society without military service or a social contract, right?
Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting because we'd have to do a whole stream on Tolkien and stuff. Get back to 1984. I know, but I feel like
Tolkien and Lewis and Orwell are all they're in a similar, they're in very similar like geo-historical context. They're all reading.
Yeah,
each
I mean,
other's
they all
works.
came from the same background, the same sort of schools, the same sort of perspectives. But I think specifically with that.
Yes, get back to 1984.
All right, well, just real quick, because it wasn't a big king that came in and saved everyone in Tolkien, Marmaduke. I see where you're trying to go with it, but who won? Who defeated Sauron?
The hobbits won on their own at the end.
Hobbits.
Right.
It was the anarchist hobbit who just decided it was his job to go out and throw the ring and reject power. It was the anarchist
because Sauron underestimated. Yeah.
Yes.
Sauron's
exactly.
worldview is power centric.
It wasn't. Like I can see where you were trying to lead me. Like, oh yeah, well of course we need a big king to come in, but actually in Lord of the Rings you did not need the big kings almost screwed everything up. Boromir and all those kind of
Aragorn does play a central role. He distracts Sauron. He basically
they do their bit.
Yeah.
But he's not even a king. He's an exiled king. He's a king in exile. So he's
all right.
He's a guy who wants to be a king but doesn't get kingship until he finds a bunch of dead dudes, and then he's kind of an undead.
So you remember the scouring of the Shire, though, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, the Shire gets screwed up, but
by Saruman, who's Saruman is kind of like one of these totalitarian,
I mean, totalitarians can run roughshod over anarchists. That happened in the Spanish Civil War. It was Frodo's mercy. Well,
right.
Okay,
even like compassion towards Gollum, who's just nasty in every way.
It was the anarchist. It was the anarchist hobbit with no ambitions beyond just wanting to have a fun adventure, who went out and did the right thing and was kind to people. Right? He was kind to Gollum, and that is what saved the world. It wasn't the armies. It wasn't the kings. The anarchist society did get, screwed up by the orcs. It got taken over and people were miserable for a while. But in the end, it isn't the kings and the armies and the power, because power is the ring, right? The ring is power. It is the authority.
Corrupting influence. Let's use the enemy's weapon against him. Yeah.
No, it was the humble individual making the right call morally.
All right, so Mike, we're trying to parse out libertarianism and okay, I feel like this should connect to 1984. I don't want to get too far off base in 1984 and start talking about Tolkien too much, right?
Well, I think the problem with 1984, if there is a problem, is that Orwell wasn't a libertarian, right? Like he had libertarian sympathies, but because you made this point on Twitter, I think.
Right, I said that he doesn't believe in God, so he has a pessimistic.
He doesn't believe in God.
Yeah, there's no Hobbit triumph.
Yeah, so he doesn't have that kind of fallback where he can be like, well, you know what, you do the right thing, and in the end, that's what matters. Tolkien should, let's do Tolkien at some point. But yeah, so I think in that sense, like you were very right? Like I think he's very pessimistic. And the lack of faith in God might be one of those things. I don't think it necessarily has to be that case, but I'm not sure. I mean, that's a whole nother stream in and of itself. Whether people can have faith in morality or justice without God, which I mean we could get into for hours if you want, but that might
It seems to be a sticking point. Like it strikes me that a lot of the atheists still recognize how important God is to this conversation, where God is central to the conversation in Orwell's fiction, even though like he didn't need to bring God into the conversation. But it's sort of like if you want to talk about fundamental morality, God almost instantly comes up because God is a person. God isn't just an amorphous blob of universe. He has personality and makes decisions. And anytime we're talking about morality, we're talking about our decisions and our agency as human beings, right? So I think the ultimate version of that is a conversation about God. And for Winston and for O'Brien, the question is there a God outside of Big Brother, or is God Big Brother?
Yeah. Well, I would say like the thing that I would get into on this is the I don't know how to pronounce Greek. The Euthyropo dilemma. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't want to. It's the Plato dilemma. It's Plato's dilemma about is God is the good because God wills it, or is God good because
all right. Yeah. Could God just decide a completely different set of moral standards? I got it.
Yeah,
so I'll give you like the standard Christian thought. I think I could speak for Right Geek in this, where then the Christian solution would be goodness is in God's nature, and God's nature is immutable. So if God woke up and said, today I want murder to be good, I want the commandment to be thou shalt kill, God couldn't do that because it's not in his nature to do that. So then the problem is
the good is the good regardless of whether God believes it's the good.
But then you would have to say that goodness has its existence in God. When we say God is good, it's sort of like the reason goodness is that goodness reflects the nature of God. So God has the God has the immutable nature, and then God attribute of God sort of trickles down or is reflected in the good as we practice it.
Okay, well, but is the good a priori, right?
I got you.
Is God good? Is it good as a reflection of God because God is the source of good? Okay, Right Geek says that God is the source of good. God defines good. If that's the case, like, could God? Yeah, there is that question of like, could God simply create a world in which good was something else?
All right.
Or
then I would say in my framework, he'd have to violate his nature to do that,
okay,
right?
The trouble with that is that if goodness exists a priori, like before God, then doesn't that mean that goodness is greater than God?
Right. You'd have this problem that there'd be a law higher than God that God is subject to.
Is there a law higher than God to which God is subject to, or does God invent the laws and we
all right, and then I would say I'd say he's neither subject to them nor arbitrarily inventing them. He is unified with them, right? So I think that's the usual Christian perspective. Like, I'm just spoiler warning. Nobody has an answer to this. It's one of those things that's been in philosophy. It's one of these like infinite logical problems, right?
Yeah, people.
I feel like that's a fair answer. Where if you're talking about, I've always felt like there's a difference between me saying God is good and not good, and me saying God is infinitely good, where a human being cannot understand the statement God is infinitely good. I can't understand the concept of infinity, but the statement God is infinitely good is, at least it's a logically comprehensible statement if it's not it's not a statement that's comprehensible by a finite human brain.
You'd be more towards, so would it be safe to say that both you and Right Geek would be more towards good being inherently good, regardless of whether, like, if God decided that child murder and cannibalizing women was good tomorrow, that wouldn't be good, right?
Right. We would agree. I think we would agree that the good is inherently good because God, and one reason why we say the good is inherently good is because God is immutable in His goodness. So if God is immutable in His goodness, then goodness is immutable. Okay. In him, yeah.
Well, because I think the thing is, like, there's a lot of different philosophers who've weighed in on this, and there's a lot of different consequences for this as well. Some of it's kind of irrelevant and old, and old meme, old think, forget about it. But one of the things that I think is quite interesting is how this relates to relativism versus objectivism. Right?
Okay.
Because that's something that's been coming up a lot, in the kind of intellectual dark web.
And still, just for the Right Geek's sake, this still completely relates to 1984,
yes,
because the denial of reality is the central tenet of Big Brother. Yeah.
Central tenet of Big Brother and all this stuff. So I would say, right, that the goodness exists before God is an objective position, right? Like, this is the root of objective reality. We say that there is something that's good because it is inherently good.
So Ayn Rand would say it would exist, and Ayn Rand would say it would exist without God. You could have an objective moral reality without God. Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I'm not sure like exactly how Ayn Rand related to God. I mean, I do
I thought
think
you were just straight atheist. I thought you were just like straight hardline atheist.
I mean, she's pretty atheist. I know, like, she called it objectivism, and there's a lot of things that she thinks are objective, but I'm not sure if she thinks that all morality is objective, and I'd have to go and read up into it. But just objectivism as a general, like, not necessarily Ayn Rand objectivism, but objectivism in a moral context, like the idea that you believe there is something that is inherently good and that is good across cultures, regardless of who you are, regardless of what Big Brother has to say about it or the party has to say about it. It is good throughout time, right?
Some illustrations. So Winston thinks about a mother's gesture of love towards her child to go hug the baby is a kind of good in defiance of Big Brother. And he keeps looking at little human gestures like that, or little feminine gestures of love.
He's got that kind of idea that there is an objective morality out there, like C.S. Lewis argues in all of his books, that there's
right. And Lewis would have made it like, he makes it completely central. No culture would celebrate a warrior who is a coward in a battle for the survival of his tribe.
He didn't live to see current year or clown year. So, but anyways, going to the other side though, the other side of the use of the E dilemma, right? That God decides what's good. That I think is related more to relativism, right? Moral relativism. The idea that morality is contextual. It's defined by people. Healthy culture would
healthy. So the key emphasis is healthy. Yeah. So if the space lizards celebrate cowardice,
well, that in and of itself is an objective moral statement. It's saying that there is something objectively healthy that is the good regardless of what happens. But the flip side, of course, is this idea of moral relativism, that there is no objective moral framework. And I think one of the really interesting things about the E dilemma, and this is something that I haven't really read much in the literature because I'm not that well read. I'm sure people have gone over it. But there is actually a case to be made for objective morality if you decide that the E dilemma goes the other way. If you decide that God creates what is good, that what is good is subordinate to God, right?
So let me see if I'm tracking with you. So the idea is, I guess the problem is an atheist could be participating in this too. But if you say God decides what is good, therefore what is good is arbitrary, then that could trickle down to you saying, therefore what is good is arbitrary.
But it's not arbitrary though. That would be my pushback. It's, if God decides what is good, then God decides what is good. What's good isn't necessarily arbitrary. I mean, it might be arbitrary to God, but it's not arbitrary to us. We have an objective standard, an immutable objective standard for what is the good, and that standard is God. He has decided what's good. And
now the problem is you could have the state. You could replace God with the state in that situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could, but I think just more broadly than that, I think the issue that you were kind of getting at, like how do atheists wrestle with these kind of moral questions in the absence of God? I think that is the main problem, because if you answer the E dilemma in the sort of the latter way, right, like the relative way, like God decides what's good, for a Christian, either way, or like a theist in general, like anybody who believes in gods or the gods, you have an objective standard of morality, no matter which way you think morals go, whether you think morals are subordinate to God or God is subordinate to morals or whatever, you still have the objective standard. But for atheists, if you don't have that idea that morality is above God and that God is subordinate to morality, then all of a sudden you've lost any sort of semblance for an objective moral state, right? This is why people have such a hard time wrestling with the idea of morality in a post-God state, because if you get rid of God and you think that God is the font of morality, which I think many people do, many people assume, then there's absolutely no reason to have these morals at all. It is simply arbitrary. You can come up with anything you want, and worse, like if you believe that morality is defined by the state, which I think is self-defeating. I think you can make some really strong logical and rational cases for disputing the the ability of the state to come up with morality, ex nihilo.
Now Big Brother's trying to do that. Yeah.
Big Brother believes it can do that. And if you have that kind of situation where Big Brother is simply creating morals out of nothing, it can shift the morals. You get this what a lot of like hardcore conservative commentators call anarcho-tyranny, right? Mm-hmm. Like you guys have heard of that?
I've heard of that. Yeah. So I guess the idea is that the tyrannical ruling class could allow anarchy. They'll allow rioters to burn down a city for a Black Lives Matter protest, but they'll enforce the law against that boomer couple that stepped onto their line with guns, right? Yeah, like selective enforcement of the law on your enemy.
They could let you burn down all the stuff as a Black Lives Matter protester. Then when Biden comes in, they'll come up and scoop you up and be like, "Hey, sorry, but you're not useful anymore." Kind of like what's happening to Antifa with them getting cracked down by the FBI. But yeah, so when you have the government as the font of morality, you do start to get this like, oh crap, what do we do? And I think that is the main issue with moral relativism versus objectivism. Like it's not so much whether people believe in moral relativism or moral objectivity. I know that's a very popular discussion, especially with like Jordan Peterson, Molyneux, all these kind of wacky weirdo hate thinkers.
The intellectual dark web.
Yes, the brotherhood who's undermining our great society. But I think very specifically the biggest issue is relativism when it starts to get into this dilemma and the state starts to become the arbitrator of morality, and people start to believe that what is the good simply because the state says it. There was actually a really interesting debate that I saw once. This was one of those moments that, like, it didn't turn me into a Christian or anything. Like, I'm not that lame. But it did get me to rethink some of my previous beliefs. It was a debate between was it Ken Ham, actually? It might have been Ken Ham.
Was it Ken Ham, Bill Nye?
No, it was. Well, I saw that too. That was really disappointing because I thought Bill Nye got his ass creamed by Ken Ham, which was too bad. Because I was really pulling for Bill Nye. But no, it was something else. But it was a debate about objective morals versus relative morals, and whether objectivity or relativism were true. Like the postmodern guy versus the hardcore conservative Christian guy, basically.
Yeah.
And at one point in the debate, the Christian guy starts maneuvering this Pomo relativist, Derrida kind of, wacky French dude. And he says, well, if you believe that morals are dependent on cultures, would you say that it was moral for the Nazis to murder Jews? Right? And of course, this is one of those questions that gets brought up on social media, and you just kind of shout it down, and everybody's like, blah, 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 blah. But these two guys were actually like scholars, like they're intellectuals, so you can't just, block you, Twitter, right. Blah, blah, blah. And he was very honest. He was like, no, it would have been moral. It was moral for the Nazis to murder Jews at that time. And
right, because and this is where like definition of terms comes in. It's moral, he's saying it's moral because that if what is moral is what the government and the culture says, and the government and the culture says do that, then it becomes it's just sort of simple logic, right?
Yeah, that's the only way to answer it, if that is your premise, right? And I think that's the premise of a lot of these kinds of people. And it is incredibly dangerous. I mean, you see it with, like, I don't think most people are cognizant of it. Like, getting back to what I was saying, like I think the difference between the inner party and the outer party is that the inner party is maybe a bit smarter and knows a bit more about what's going on, whereas the outer party just kind of they really embody doublethink, or they're supposed to embody this doublethink, and like, you think morality is relative. Like, if you're an SJ, let's say, like stereotypical SJ, and you think that morality is relative and it's not defined by God and it's defined by culture, but then
racism is bad.
You've got this whole big list of problematic and toxic behaviors, right? Racism is bad, classism is bad, sexism is bad, all these bad things.
This struck me when I read, like, so I've read some, when I read, like, feminists, and they'll say rape is problematic, I'll just think they describe rape as problematic in the same kind of language that they'll say, well, Jordan Peterson is problematic. Without the word evil, you run out of like the proper word to describe outrageous things. Winston believes the party is trying to help people. O'Brien disabusivism of the nation.
O'Brien is
just about power.
O'Brien might be lying about a lot of things. I think O'Brien's a snake and a con artist and a conniving bastard. But I absolutely agree with that. I think that the whole point of the oligarchical collectivist, right? And I think that accurately describes the people in power in the real world as well, right? Like, I think that is the perfect description of lizard society. It's oligarchical collectivism. They're collectivists who also happen to be extraordinarily rich. But yeah, that's the split between the outer and inner party. Like, the outer party believes the stuff that they are fed from the inner party, but at the inner party level, they don't give a crap about racism. There was actually a controversy recently in Britain, where I think it was either Britain or Canada, where one of their diversity ministers had come out and saying, she was caught saying that there was nothing wrong with slavery, or that, like, slavery wasn't well, her argument was like slavery wasn't bad because at the time when the Europeans showed up, the Africans had no concept of rights.
Yeah.
So, slavery was just, that's what happens. And it was only after the Europeans had imparted the concept of rights on them that suddenly slavery became bad. So it's, it's kind of a horrible thing to say, but you can kind of get where she's coming from. But she got cancelled over that. Like, when that came out, she had to resign.
Or Justin Trudeau being in blackface.
That's another, like, rules for thee, not for me kind of thing. But it's not really the case that it's rules for thee, not for me. They don't even give a shit about that, right? It's just, you have rules, and there you go. There are your rules, right? Like, that is the rule. Right? Like, people think that they're hypocrites, but just like Punisher, they're not actually hypocrites because their rules never were intended to include them. Right, their rules are simply. For
I saw a comic that I saw a meme where I think it's like Calvin's babysitter. And Calvin's babysitter says to him, "When I hold you, what is it? I hold you accountable to your principles because that suits my principles. I don't hold myself accountable to your principles because that suits my principles," right? And then Calvin is shocked because he thought that there was a fair standard where we both follow the same rules, right? Like, if I don't agree to follow the same rules as you, then you shouldn't be surprised when I just completely ignore your principles or use your principles against you.
People, they get so shocked and they try and analyze. There was actually this really great quote, which, again, I wish I had this quote. It may have been apocryphal. I think it was assigned to, like, Kissinger or something, or not Kissinger, the other one, like Cheney, or what is these neocons? But it was basically like we are the axis around history, around which history revolves, and as we do things, you react, and by the time you're done reacting, we've already moved on to the next thing, right? Like you can try and analyze what they're doing if you want. You can try and put like, logical constraints and be like, oh, you know, what are you doing? But if you are a creature of pure will.
All right. So I keep referencing like the Overlord lizards, right? Because that's it's sort of like a fun Alex Jones way of alluding to the problem. Right. Now in 1984, this is a party. This is maybe access to the inner party is a little vague. It's not heredity. Winston's a smart guy, but he's not apparently not smart enough to be part of the inner party. We don't really get to see what but it's still a party, right? And they have control over a region. So can you really have that if it's just amorphous elitists at parties together? You know, do they have to gather in cloaks with wear black cloaks and show up at a table and sacrifice?
This is one of the reasons why, like, I think people should really go out and check out James Corbett and James Evan Pilato if they haven't been deplatformed, because they're on this like kind of Alex Jones perspective, but they're much more reasonable. Like they don't do it for show, right? Like Alex Jones is very much a showman. I don't think he believes half the shit he talks about, and he's hepped up on all kinds of drugs. And he was big friends with Joe Rogan and Mike Judge growing up. If that tells you anything.
And some of his descriptions of demons sound like drug trips. But I like Alex Jones as a character, but I can't take him seriously. Even if I find
he plays a character. He plays a character. He's got some. I mean that's one of these O'Brien things, right? Because O'Brien is the controlled opposition, right? This is the idea of the controlled opposition, that the people in power put out these people who appear to be like Russell Brand. He is the exact definition of control opposition. Do you guys know Russell Brand?
Yeah, I know Russell Brand, right?
Right. Okay. Well, Reiki can't reply, but I'm sure she knows Russell Brand too. If not, Russell Brand is this long-haired weirdo actor guy.
He's like a rock and roller or something?
Yeah, he does I think he was in a rock band, or he has like a rock band on the side, and he does like comedy films. And he kind of does like weird new age, like David Icke kind of things, like, oh, conspiracies and all this kind of stuff. And he gets promoted by like Twitter and MTV, right? And if you look into it, like, do you know who his wife is?
No. We're just going to go down the rabbit hole, aren't we?
Are you looking it up? Because if you figure out who his wife is, you might figure out why he gets promoted by like MTV and like GQ magazine and all these sort of establishment pieces.
Okay, so let me. Andrew Klavan has a quip that there can be he jokes that it's the Klavanon conspiracy, where you don't need to have a conspiracy if people have the same interests. They'll just naturally act in a particular. It's not.
Yeah, I think the point that like James and James make is that they're not like these demonic, like literally demonic groups who sacrifice babies around midnight. I mean, they do some of that stuff, like
Maria Abramovich, yeah.
Yeah, like they are interested in that stuff, but it's one of those like the elite's interest in the occult is very like, even Hitler had that interest too, but it's not something they do all day long, and it's more I think it's more like LARPing, right?
It's sort of like it's Harry Potter-ish.
Yeah,
right?
It's Harry Potter for grown-ups, basically, for rich, bored grown-ups. So they do that stuff, but the more important thing is that they live in these circles and they know each other. They go to the same parties. They have the same friends. They're very connected. Just been educated in the same few institutions.
Into the same world. Exactly. Right.
The same schools. They all went to Eton. It's that is why they're so connected. But yeah, just in case nobody can find this, Russell Brand's wife is one of the Rothschilds.
All right. Of course.
And, like the super, like they're not even billionaires. They don't even.
Well, I thought the Rothschilds lost their fortune though.
That's what their Wikipedia says. But the thing is, like, there comes a time when you have so much money. Like, if you are the person who can create money, you don't need money anymore.
All right. Yeah. Maybe it's the difference between being a billionaire and a multimillionaire. You're still good. Yeah.
I mean, more than that, it's the difference between like being the god of money and being just like some merchant who runs around, right? Like if you are one of the chief banking families in the world who's capable of creating money, nothing.
Like the Fed, like the Fed is a private. Everybody assumes the Fed's just the government, and it's not.
Yeah, look up James Corbett's expose on the Federal Reserve. He used to have one that was super popular on YouTube. I think YouTube deleted it during one of their waves of purging, but he does a really good episode on the federal government. But basically,
but by the way, do you think that cryptocurrency is like a positive development away from that, or do you think that cryptocurrency?
I thought it was, but it's going to be undermined. I mean, even Corbett's been saying this. My big fear right now is not so much the currency. Like I was an early adopter of cryptocurrency. I think we should go back to the gold standard, all that kind of stuff. So cryptocurrency is a good alternative to the gold standard. I think my biggest fear right now is NFTs. I think that's going to absolutely, maybe it won't, but I think that has the potential to absolutely fuck the internet completely and irrevocably for all time.
All right.
And I'm not even exaggerating. I know you made a funny meme joke about NFTs.
Yeah, right.
But I think because the trouble with NFTs is, right, like you can embed software and computer files, and you can make them non-copyable, and that is the holy grail for the lizards that want to put us back in surf.
All right, so you could make things permanently incapable of being spread around, right?
Instead of having like your copy of Windows Word or something, you'll have an NFT of Windows Word.
All right,
and then they'll charge you money, and then if you don't pay them, they take away your NFT. Or the NFT will be on a cloud. I mean, it's already happening with things like cloud computing, right? Like trying to take away your access to information, your ability to copy files and to own your own data. This might be me getting back into Marxist mode, but anybody who owns a phone or owns a computer, you must take control of the means of production. You need that control of the means of production, and as soon as the oligarch, if Big Brother comes in and tries to take that means of production, you are screwed, because your freedom depends on your access to the means of production.
All right.
Whoever controls it, they got you by the balls.
I feel like this ties in nicely to kind of like how the internet has evolved, where the internet in its early days feels like a wild west, and the internet feels like it's becoming a more controlled space, right? Like it's becoming more corporate. It's becoming.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have to ask you, when did you first hear that Wild West meme? Do you remember?
I feel like I heard people talking about it in relation to like old 2009 4chan-y stuff.
Well, not necessarily in relation, but when do you remember people specifically referring to the internet as a Wild West?
I think it would have been Mr. Medicare, kind of like looking back fondly. I bet it was Mr. Medicare. Yeah.
Do you remember how?
If not that term, at least that concept.
Do you remember how long ago? Like, was it recent? Like within the last few years? Kind of?
4 years, I'd say.
Okay, because this is something that I've actually been really interested. That specific meme. Again, the Corbetts, they've been going over this for over a decade now. Is about the idea that the internet is going to be destroyed, and that people are going to try and clamp down and do the newspeak thing to the internet. And this isn't just them talking about it. It's been in papers. It's been discussed at globalist think tanks, at places like.
Wait, it's not Jeremy Corbyn, is it? Are you talking about Jeremy Corbyn or some different?
No, not Jeremy. James Corbett.
James Corbett. Okay.
Yeah, Corbett. He's a Japanese guy. Well, he's a Canadian guy living in Japan, so pretty soy.
By the way, the right geek, I would read an Iron Man book about Tony Stark exposing the lizards because he's amongst the lizards. Yeah.
Why Marvel's so excited? Yes, exactly. If Marvel's excited about NFTs, that is exactly why, because they don't want you to be able to trade and and reprint and republish comics. They want to control the means. They want to control your files, right? And NFTs are the perfect way to control files. As soon as you get that, piracy's done, right? Because
now why can't I just screenshot the NFT?
Well,
right? Like I understand how that would work,
but then they're gonna I mean, there's gonna be like a whole like arms race of people trying to do stuff like that, and then they're going to be like, well, you can only access it on your phone, and we've got to disable screenshotting, and then you're like, well, I can use this console over here, inspect elements, and but then they pressure people to take away inspect elements. So I don't think it's going to be a complete disaster right away, but because I think there is going to be this arms race, but I do think that this is exactly where the corporate lizard men are trying to bring
intellectual property. Intellectual property is $1 billion.
If you are not aware of it, it's going to be easier for them to do it. So we really got to fight back about stuff like that. But yeah, so this is an idea that's been floated, like the idea that the internet will be destroyed, and that it'll turn into an Orwellian system of control, right? It's not a new idea. It's been talked about not just by conspiracy theorists, but
it's a normal observation. Yeah,
and it's been a plan for decades in big tech, and they don't really publish this stuff openly all that much. The really nice thing about James Corbett is that he does something called open source journalism, where he actually tells, like, it's not Alex Jones where it's like, oh, I found the top guy. I can't tell you who he is because he's a general, but you can believe me, he's a top guy, and he told me all this stuff about the aliens.
They have human frog hybrids in jars.
Human frog hybrids in the jars of demons! This kind of stuff, right? Like, James isn't like that. He actually goes and he shows you where in, like the New Republic piece written by the guy from the Center for Foreign Relations, right? Where they say that they're trying to angle towards these things. So it's all pretty reliable, but they've been trying to do this for a while. And the thing was, like, this idea of the internet having been the Wild West that needs to be tamed was something that got brought up to me maybe like 8 years ago by a normie just out of the blue. And this was way after people had been discussing it in like conspiracy theory circles, and the only thing I could think was like, because this guy only really got his information from he was very blue pilled, right?
Right. Like they'll say, they say mean things on 4chan, so we've got to stop 4chan somehow.
So I was like, has it started? Like, has the memeing like been inserted into the cultural discourse now, where people are going to be prepped for accepting the destruction of the internet? Because I think I've mentioned in previous streams that the meme of civil war had been inserted into the discourse years ago, like 10 years ago. We had civil war stuff, and people weren't really seeing it. And now all of a sudden everybody sees it. And I think this Wild West concept specifically, like the internet's the Wild West and we need to tame it. I think specifically this is a concept which is working towards the interests of the lizards, who really do want to turn us into an NFT, cloud computing. You get the chip in the brain that sends you to Google, and Google tells you exactly, the one thing. There was a really horrible clip that James presented from a Google executive, where he said something to the effect of like when you put in a Google search and Google brings you 30,000 results, that is not a feature, that is a bug.
Okay.
And his point was that what we want to do, we want to get rid of the bugs, and we want Google to return the exact answer you need, the one answer to your question.
Where the problem is, then that has Google essentially in a position of determining what truth is.
Exactly.
Who should I vote for? Google results produces the articles that shape you. Yeah. And so when what's his name? When Chunk Uger says just Google it, then Google will provide the answers.
Google will provide you the answer that Google wants you to have. And I mean, on the one hand, like I can kind of see where he's coming from, because you do want an accurate answer, But that kind of thinking, it does. It inevitably leads to this idea that Google is the arbiter of truth, right? If Google provides you like 30,000 answers, yeah, that's a lot of answers, but I'm smart enough. I can go through and I can work out the answer myself. Thank you very much. The problem is when Google only gives me the answer that Google wants, then Google is Big Brother. Google
and
is.
This is just. I've just seen like thousands of examples of this where a result that's politically incorrect gets de-emphasized or removed. If you Google, I think on Amazon, if you try to search for some banned book, the first thing that'll come up is response to so and so's banned book.
Even something. I mean. This has been going on for years. There was you remember the P Bear. I'm not going to say it on stream because this.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
You remember the
2009,
bear guy.
Good old 2009 meme.
Have you tried? Have you tried looking him up on the internet? I don't know if it works anymore. Like I haven't tried it in years. But it used to be that you'd look it up on Bing, and one day. Like it just redirected you to a mental health website. Like it didn't even pull up anything. It just said, "Hey, get help for your mental health stuff."
On Google or on Bing?
I think it was on Bing. It might have been on Google as well. I know Bing usually jumps on that kind of stuff early, but
well, they don't. And I guess I put myself in an FBI watch.
Yeah, don't look it up. Don't look it up.
Your meme and Wikipedia came up, right?
Okay. Well, it used to be that they would redirect you straight to a mental health website. Like that was the only result. It was just, hey, go do this. And like it sounds funny. Like, oh yeah, haha, funny meme, whatever.
But it means that they're interpreting a silly meme seriously, right?
Yeah, because it's not just going to be the memes. Is the problem, right? Like this is the slippery slope, right? Like we're fine when the funny meme gets deplatformed because it's just a funny meme. We're fine when the child abusers get deplatformed. Yeah, COVID info.
People you can't retweet certain kinds of tweets. You get the little notification. Official sources question this.
Right. Then it was the Muslims, the radical Muslims. Then it was the slightly less radical Muslims. Then it was the hate speakers. And the racists and the evil conservatives. And now it's COVID, right? COVID will get you a little bleep on your thing. And there was, real life Big Brother guys like Cass Sunstein. I'm pretty sure I brought him up. And even if it's a true story about a jab injury, well, how do you determine what's true? You need the journos. You need the Orwells to determine what's true.
Not Orwell himself, but Orwellian in the sense of Big Brother, in the sense of his character.
Orwell himself, because this is like the normie take, right? Somebody there?
Sorry, I think that was on my end.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'm in charge. Should I go with this thought?
You can keep going. What I'll do is I'll just mute before I talk. Yeah.
Okay. Well, basically, like the normie take about 1984, right? And feel free to chime in and chat or whatever if you think I'm wrong about this. But having known lots of people in education, the general take that people come away with is that 1984 isn't actually a prediction about the future. It's not so much a utopian book as it is a warning about the environment in which Orwell lived, right?
So he's taking things he sees in his day and trying to project forward, right?
Well, not even projecting forward. It's one of these. Again, it's like an allegory. It's like Animal Farm was an allegory. Like it was presented as a fun little kids book, but it was very intentionally meant to be an allegory of the Soviet Union and the Bolshevik Revolution. 1984 was, yes, it's a science fiction-y, utopian, dystopian novel about the future, but it's also an allegory for Europe in the 1940s, specifically Britain, and more specifically, the BBC at which Orwell was working, right?
All right.
And this is something...
So he's seeing the BBC as being like an early fake news organization?
Brother corporation. It wasn't even like, it was early from our perspective, but there were fake news corporations stretching all the way back to the beginning of news. The BBC, in his time, though, like, he was involved in the dissemination of fake news, censorship. One of the things that I think Americans maybe don't really appreciate is the fact that overseas, like in the UK, there's very little, until comparatively recently, trying to show the logical conclusion of the BBC's embrace of fake news. Kind of, but it wasn't the BBC's embrace of fake news right now, or the logical conclusions of that. It was exactly what was happening at the time, right? The things that were going on in 1984, it wasn't going to happen in 1984. I think what Orwell was trying to say in a very sort of allegorical, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink way, and this, from my experience, has been the perspective of many sort of like educators and things, as well, who read this book, was that Orwell was trying to make a statement about what was happening right then, right? It wasn't that, well, we will eventually arrive at this point where the oligarchs use socialism to oppress people. That's exactly what's happening.
It's less about Stalin's Russia than it is about the British socialism.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's about Stalin's Russia, it's about Nazi Germany, it's about Britain's socialism, it's about FDR in the United States, it's about everything that was going on in his time. And he was writing, this allegorical story that was, isn't it going to be creepy? But in many ways, he was just describing what was going on at his time.
Okay.
I think there were some aspects that were maybe projecting into the future, most notably about the idea that the telescreen could observe you as well, which gets into the idea of the panopticon, which was a big thing in progressive circles. Are you familiar with the panopticon?
Nope, I don't know that.
Okay, this was a seminal work back in like the before times. I think the 19th century or something. I should have researched it before bringing it up. But basically, it was a book about prison reform. Like a lot of the French socialists were spurging about it back in the 20th century. But it's a book about prison reform, and the argument, the central idea, is that the ideal prison will be one in which people can be observed at all times, but they won't know whether they're being observed or not. They'll never be able to tell whether at which moment they're being observed. So they will then adopt like a constant state of paranoia, where at any point, even if you're not observing them, they will still be good, right?
Now, why is that? Now, why is that preferable to actually just observing them all the time?
Yeah, well, I mean, they go into that because I mean, there's a whole bunch of different reasons, but the main reasons are, one, like the practical aspect, because you can't just pay somebody to observe somebody 24 hours a day. Like, you'll get really bored and want to go away. But also because, like, if anybody, like, if you're being observed at any one time, you're being observed, and you'll just, you'd be like, okay,
right.
I'm being observed.
You have to have the prisoners think they could be observed, therefore they won't act in a certain way. Winston is under the assumption that he's being observed at any moment.
Yeah, but he doesn't know that specifically
kill him, right?
Yeah.
And
like
did they take so long to catch him because they were waiting?
Well, nobody knows.
Because they're not as efficient as they claim.
Yeah, nobody knows. That's one of the great horrors of the panopticon, is that you can never be sure. Like, if I know I'm being observed, right, and then all of a sudden, like, you're sitting across from me, and I'm trying to type in the P-Bear memes, and I'm like, no, I can't type in P-Bear because Marmaduke's staring at me. But then all of a sudden, you turn your back or you cough, and I'm like, quick, P-Bear, ha, meme, right? But if you're like behind a glass wall, right, like one of those two-way one-way glass mirror kind of setups, and I know you're back there, or I think you're back there, but I can never be sure. So I'm like, no, you have no way of telling whether you're being observed, and it leads to all kinds of weird psychological trauma, and it really helps to keep prisoners in line. Was this idea of panopticon, right? And this idea of the panopticon was then sort of extrapolated, because in many ways it's like God, right? God as the font of moral judgment, because you think you're being observed by God, right? You can never be quite sure. You're pretty sure God's going to be looking at you.
He sees
Like,
you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good, so be good for
Santa Claus
goodness sake.
thing too. I mean, if you want to do it with Santa Claus, because Santa Claus isn't as perfect as God, right? Santa might fuck up. But yeah, so can I do something bad? Will Santa see? Like, God, I have no way of knowing, so I better be good. So it's kind of an attempt to do that, but in a secular context. And I think, again, getting back to James Corbett, this is something that they've brought up with Snowden, with this idea that Edward Snowden may actually be used as an O'Brien type figure.
Okay, because he's like an outsider who's a persona non grata from the government.
Yeah, he is the Eurasian traitor who ran off to Eurasia and exposed all these things about Big Brother, but he's evil, and he's talking about Big Brother, and he's a Goldstein, right? He even looks like Goldstein. He looks like a sheep. I hate his face. Him and that tranny guy, whatever his name is.
You're just gonna get a salty platform, yeah.
No, I hate them. I disavow all of them, right? I'm faithful to Oceania, and Biden, our savior. But I think the idea is because when all the Snowden revelations came out, right, nothing really happened. Right? The feds weren't thrown in prison. The NSA wasn't dismantled. Now all that happens is we've got this joke that, like, if you type in P-Bear into Google, you get put on a list, and oh ha ha ha. But is that really a joke? I mean, I think on some level.
Why are the glowies on 4chan all the time? Why do FBI agents make photoshops and post them on Twitter trying to attract people?
Joke, right? We've all kind of internalized this narrative that Big Brother is indeed watching us, that our telescreens are indeed watching us. And it's probably true, right? Like, the telescreens are collecting our information. They are sending data about us. We can never be quite sure how much information there is. Like, I typed in P-Bear memes 20 years ago, right? Or however long, 10 years ago? Whenever that was a thing, 10 years ago, let's say.
Could they really keep thousands of terabytes of data for years?
I mean, I'm sure that's still out there somewhere, but the point is, like, I've never been sent to prison for Googling P-Bear memes.
Right.
Like, I was even in the military, and I was doing that stuff, and I got away with it. So shit posting on.
You're just acting under the assumption that someone probably knows if you Google something like that. Don't Google certain phrases.
Right, like that fear that everybody on the internet is familiar with it, right? The glowy meme, the idea that if you do certain things or if you say certain things, Google will deplatform you, or the government will come after you, or the Russians will get a hold of your information.
All right,
maybe the Chinese.
In addition to the existence of that, you're saying the mental condition of being aware of the existence of that is itself a form of torture and could be a form of control. At
least 80% of the effectiveness of, like, a panopticon type society is just pure mental. Maybe more than that. 95% of it. It doesn't even matter if the telescreens are working, if the cameras.
Do you think that Orwell was aware of this, like, 20th century French discussion?
Oh yeah, no, he was definitely aware, because again, this is something that was really popular in progressive circles for decades and generations. It was something that was big in Britain, in the kind of intellectual circles he was running in, and I'm sure it was popular in the BBC as well. The BBC didn't quite have the sophistication to spy on people all the time. They do now, and they actually have for quite a long time. Like, again, this is maybe something that Americans also don't know. Britain has had, like, surveillance state technology everywhere for decades at this time. We're being watched on these streams. Yeah, I mean, we are being watched on these streams. Hopefully. Hello, audience. How are you?
I mean, I think in China they have the joke that if you speed, there's going to be a camera that'll just pick you up speeding, and cameras that pick you up and they just mail you your ticket because they got you on camera.
I mean, that's the essence of the panopticon. Like, Britain, it's everywhere in Britain right now. They're completely desensitizing people to around 1984.
Okay,
even in the
I'm
time that
I'm familiar with a stream of thought in kind of maybe more like the liberal kind of thought. Well, they'll talk about like the iPhone as participating in an Orwellian surveillance state, where anywhere you go, other citizens could be filming you at any given moment, right?
Everybody has their own personal telescreen. I think in that sense, we've outpaced Orwell. I think we could say that Orwell was prescient, or he was predicting the future in that sense. But I think Orwell himself, right, wasn't necessarily trying to predict the future. He was trying to make a point about the present. I mean, do you guys know who owned the media in Britain at the time Orwell was?
It wasn't the Queen of England.
Yeah, basically. I mean, Britain has long had government-controlled media, like state-controlled media. Actually, I was born in the UK to like UK parents or whatever, but I immigrated early. But I used to go back there a lot, and I remember it wasn't until like the early 2000s, I think, that they got like a fifth TV channel, or like the 1990s, they got their fifth TV channel, and that was a big deal because that was the TV channel that played The Simpsons,
right?
Like within American media.
So it wasn't a BBC channel.
Well, I think it was ITV. I think was the fifth.
Oh, I used to watch ITV when I was in London. Yeah.
I think it was partly like jointly owned. I'd have to look it up. Like they've opened up the media since then. Like you can't really clamp down on the internet that much in Britain, so people do have access to non-state media. But prior to like the 90s and 2000s, everything you'd see on TV, everything you'd see on the hear on the radio, all that had to go through the government, through the Ministry of Truth.
So tying it back to Orwell, part of the point is that the West is a lot less impervious to this than we'd like to think. We'd like to think that Stalin was a bad guy who controlled the media, and we have freedom of the press, so we don't have to worry about that.
We did not at that time have freedom of the press, and I think that's what Orwell was. One of the things that Orwell was trying to say was that we do not have freedom of the press right now, as it is in Britain, here in Oceania. We otherize the Soviets, right? And the Soviets are bad. Don't get me wrong. Like I think Britain was better than the Soviet Union at that time, but it's a question of degrees rather than of kind, right?
Yeah.
Because Britain did have a government-controlled media, and even if you go into the United States in the 1940s, right? Like I'm a big opponent of FDR. I hate FDR.
Yeah.
I love FDR. He's the best president ever. But we didn't have state control.
He stopped the Depression by creating the New Deal. Did you know that? That's what my textbook told me.
He got rid of all those nasty gold holders, all those bad Bitcoin holders.
And he protected us in World War II from Japanese people. Don't worry about that.
From all the Japanese people. But the thing is, like, even in the United States, right, like, the media was very much controlled. It wasn't controlled by the state necessarily, but it was controlled by, like, even today, like, we all know that the mainstream media is in bed with the Democrats and
right? And
except for
I
Fox,
have memories.
who's kind of allowed to
it was sort of like, Fox News was different because before Fox News, it would be like Walter Cronkite. Everybody would Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather. Walter Cronkite would just be the voice of the news, and because he spoke in a deep baritone voice, that made people think he must be objective because he looks so handsome and his voice sounds so golden.
I mean, it's a private corporation, but it's one group of people. It's the oligarchs control the media in every one of these societies, and that is not something new. Again, I think this is something that a lot of people. Like kind of the normie take, right? Like maybe not the educated normie take, like the educator normie take, but like the salt of the earth normie take is that it's a prediction of the future, and we are living in a Big Brother time now, and we're getting more into Big Brother time now.
All right. So then you would add to that that it extends all the way back to Orwell's time.
It extends back to the time, and even before that too, right? Like even as far back as who was the Citizen Kane guy? something Hurst, the Hurst guy, the one that
not Damien
William
Hurst.
Randolph Hurst. No, William.
Oh,
William. No,
William
not
Randolph.
the Deadshot guy. God.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. I muted myself.
Not the Deadshot guy. Not him. The old newspaper baron that they made the Citizen Kane about. The one that started the Spanish-American War based on fake news. You guys know that? Hello, Mom. I think you muted yourself. You weren't muted before when you said you were muted, but now you're muted. Can you click the mute again? Hello. Oh God, I think you guys are gone. Type something into something, Marmaduke. Sorry, it was dumb and muted.
I got it.
Okay,
Sorry.
Yes, you're unmuted. All right. Well, I was going to start doing my song and dance number. Jump on the piano.
The number one punchy Sonic.
Yes, it is now my show. I claim this for East Asia. Need to wrap up soon, anyways. Oh yeah. Are you still you can't log back in or anything then, right, Geek? You still.
I mean, she'll have to log in to end the stream, otherwise it'll just go on forever.
Yeah, well, we could have a 24-hour stream where just nobody says anything because we all leave after 4 hours or whatever.
I think that's what we had to do last time.
Oh, was it? Yeah. Well, we can have nothing. But yeah, so I think that's kind of an important thing that people should probably understand. Is that it wasn't just about the future; it was also about the present. Because Orwell was himself like a Winston Smith type, and this is why, like earlier, I was kind of voicing my concerns about Google and whether there will be any Winston Smiths, because Orwell was himself a Winston Smith. He was a guy working at the Ministry of Truth. What was the room number where he got tortured?
101 is the final. 101 is the final room. Like they'll torture you in general, and 101 is where they find the ultimate fear.
Because the room that he gets sent, or one of the rooms that he gets sent was actually like a meeting room at the BBC, where he'd have to go for like morning meetings or something, and he hated the hell out of the room, and that's why he put that room specifically in 1984 as you know, the horrible room where everything goes to die. So little things like that. But the thing is, like what about today? Like, because Google is now the new BBC, right? Big tech is the new BBC. Facebook is the new BBC. And are there people like Winston Smiths working there who will have enough pangs of consciousness to come out and be like, yeah, you know what we're doing actually is evil, and here are all these problems, and you know, fight for your freedom again, people.
So I want to throw a potential white pill at you, which is the fact that the internet has made us. The fact that we're so beset by bad information may be an indication that that corporate power is gone, right? Like they can go on TV and say what the corporate message is, and people aren't going to care, and they're going to go read the news on Twitter from some guy with a My Little Pony avatar.
Yeah,
The My Little Pony avatar is probably going to know the situation better than the blue check mark, right?
That was what was going on in 2016, and I would encourage everybody listening to this transmission, who are the resistance. You really are the resistance. Anybody listening to this, that is what you should go for. You should really try and get away from the corporate media. I think the trouble is that with this collusion between media and big tech is trying to, it's not going to try, it is in the process of bringing us back into the corral, right? This is the whole Wild West thing. Like, they want to bring us back.
What's his name? Tim Cook of Apple would talk about how, he'll give speeches talking about how it's our responsibility, you know, to make sure that you don't get certain apps or you don't encounter certain people. Yeah,
exactly. The Facebook shut down a couple days ago. Now all these mainstream media guys are talking about how Facebook enables white supremacy, and Facebook needs to take steps to combat, you know, get rid of Republicans on its platform, right? You know, they are constantly in a war, right? Like, the enemy might seem to be defeated, right? Like in 2016, it was great because it was like, oh my God, people don't give a shit about the lizard people anymore, and this is awesome. But they will never, they don't relent. They're not just going to go home with their tails between their legs. They are going to keep trying, keep looking for chinks, keep attacking, and you're in the middle of this war, your kids will be in the middle of this war, and it's going to keep, they're going to keep trying.
This might be a good closing point, because I want to bring it back to the Hobbits and kind of like the contrast between Hobbit, the moral point of the Hobbit, the moral point of 1984. The Hobbit gets a happy ending because the simple individual who speaks a little Elvish, right? There's even like this tweet thing where the elves kind of think of Bilbo. It's almost like they think of Bilbo as a cute kid because he writes poems about elf lore in his tongue, right? Like they simultaneously, he's not as high as the elves, but he's admirable for what he is and what he's working on. Those kinds of simple people affect a great change in Tolkien's myth. 1984 isn't mythic. It doesn't have a great mythic hero. It has a defeated hero at the end who can't overcome anything. So maybe like the missing piece of 1984, if it's really good at delivering the whammy of terror, of I am terrified of Big Brother. I've been terrified of Big Brother since I was 14 without being able to understand the philosophical arguments of Big Brother at age 14. I still understood the terror of Big Brother. The Hobbit perspective is to kind of live a individual life that prevents you from being corrupted by Sauron or corrupted from the ring, so that you can have a lasting impact. Winston tries and fails to accomplish that in the end. It's even kind of admirable, I think, that he tried to gather some history and leave something for the next generation.
Yeah.
So that would kind of be my closing thought on the ethos of 1984.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree. I mean, just in one thing real quick, and specifically with Winston. I mean, in the context of the book, yeah, he is a defeated hero. But I think in the sense that this book was left, because Winston, in his defeat, gave us so much intellectual ammunition to use against the lizards, right? Like, I can't even imagine if 1984 was never written and all this stuff was just normalized.
I like that normies are aware of this book.
Yeah,
people say, oh, people don't get this book. I like that it's a meme. It's an earlier meme, like saying doublethink, and
like
you
people,
think those are.
As long as you're aware of it, as long as you're cognizant of what's going on, because the only reason that the society in 1984 works the way it does is because of ignorance, because of willful ignorance and the destruction of language and people just being stupid and not realizing. But as soon as you see what's going on, and I think this is Orwell's Marxist dialect coming back to the fore, right? Because Marxists are very big on fast consciousness, right? Like the proletariat needs to become conscious of its own power. Like, have you ever seen? Oh God, what's his name? The Enforcers, Larkin Rose.
No.
No. He's like a anarcho-capitalist guy. He does a great video on the Enforcers with dots. See if you can look that up after the stream, because it's really fun. But basically the idea is that, like, the proletariat needs to have this awareness of the issues, and as soon as they have this knowledge and they know what's going on, then they can rise up and challenge people. And in the context of the book, I mean, Winston fails and basically just turns into a vegetable, right? He turns into, like, blue-pilled, like, I'm gonna watch. He
loves Big Brother.
Yeah, I love Jimmy Kimmel. I'm gonna vote for Biden. Ha ha ha. Yeah, sitting at the at the bar. Which,
I'm an ally.
Yeah, there's so much stuff we could say about that too. We really should do more streams on this. Just throwing it out there, but that's only Winston though. I think the bigger point is that Winston actually is a hero. Like, he does succeed in what he's trying to do in a very real sense, because he gives us this information.
Yeah.
He empowers us and reaches out through the multiverse, right? This kind of Chris Chan thing where he's touching our real world. He's dimension merging with us.
Right.
He can see Biden. Yeah, vaccine mandates. Oh God. yeah, let's do another stream, because we should probably get into how
We still need to do we need to do Quickville as a dystopia.
Yeah, that's another great one. But yeah, so in that sense, like I think Winston's fine. But I think in a broader sense, right? Like I'm going to try and bring this back to what I was talking about earlier, with voluntarism and like libertarianism, and even like the previous streams when you were with C.S. Lewis and the points I was trying to make about Clown World, right? Do you guys remember that?
I generally remember that. I mean, it's something that ties in because the hideous strength,
I mean,
technocracy, it parallels so nicely with Big Brother. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, like specifically with the Clown World is that room in the hideous strength where they send people to torture them, right? It is intellectual torture, trying to get you to, look at the weird abstract art and trample the cross and listen to Marilyn Manson and do all this kind of stuff, right? And that is a representation of what internet memers call Clown World, and it's a very real thing, but it's not real. Ultimately, it's not real. Like the picture of the woman with the hair in her mouth,
Right.
all that is a picture. Like there's not literally a woman with hair in her mouth who's sitting there, right? It's not an actual woman. It's just a picture of a woman, right? You don't have to get that worried about it and worked up about it.
A malicious intellectual communicator. Oh, this is why there's that like low wit, mid wit, high wit.
Yeah.
It's like the low wit people are too dumb to care about the high wit manipulation, so it just goes over them. The mid wits are bothered by it.
Fine too. I think that's like the proletariat, like the hope of the proletariat that Orwell had, was that the sort of dumb people are going to be too dumb to fall for Clown World. But I think most people listening to this stream are at least mid-wits. Most of you are high wits, and I'm sure you know which one you're in. But I'm going to assume that you're mostly high wits, or at least mid-wits. And so for you, like you're probably very much concerned about Cloud World and all these things. But the thing is, none of it is real. All the bullshit that Big Brother tries to feed you, genders still are the way they are. There is still a sun outside, even if it's on the other side of the world because it's midnight where you're at. Reality is what it is and is what it always will be, regardless of what 2 + 2 = 4.
Get cozy. Get cozy with your hot chocolate and your blanket. Don't go out to the riots where the Civil War is burning everything down.
How many lights were there? Was there 5 lights or 4 lights? Crime Think Geek would probably know this from Star Trek.
Oh, I don't know Star Trek that well.
How many lights? That kind of stuff, right? Like that reality exists, and you don't have to get sucked into the Big Brother BS.
Oh, the Right Geek says there are 4 lights. She actually is a Star
Trek.
Trek.
4 lights. Yeah, okay. Yeah. There are 4 lights. As long as you know, and you're able to hold this in your mind, and you're able to impart this onto your children, right? Because again, as a voluntarist, like I think it would be great if everybody lived in a perfect world where everybody was happy and it was this big libertarian, like we worship Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Sowell, right? He was our president. We had Ron Paul and all this great stuff. Marmaduke Fan was our Minister of Information, right? It'd be wonderful, but we can't really live in that world. And I think a lot of people are really concerned about, like, oh God, but if I can't completely change the world, how were you framing it, Marmaduke and Right Geek, about the soul?
Okay, so Right Geek introduced the Thomas Sowell unconstrained versus constrained vision framework. I liked that better. I like that better than right versus left. Because it speaks to human nature in a more concrete way.
Like, because I understand, like I can sympathize with that unconstrained vision, right? Like I'm a romantic at heart, and I would love for an unconstrained world where human beings can overcome everything. But ultimately, maybe that's not the case. And the thing with voluntarism is that's fine, right? Like if everybody in the world, if if there are people in the world who wind up being blue-pilled and going with the lizards and drinking the Kool-Aid and dying off, like that's horrible. That's a shame. But as long as you can help yourself and help your friends and help the people around, help the community around you, your children, have kids, right? Like that's all you can do.
Love beauty and love the normal. Be a rebel by loving the normal.
Yeah, just like the hobbits, right? Like the hobbits, they do what they do, but they do what they do for their friends and their family and for themselves, right? Like
Right.
It's not necessarily a great big, like they don't save the entire world, because there are people that get killed by Sauron, right? You know, but they don't have that kind of ambition, right? Like look to yourself and look to your own life, because these big brother types are not going to go away. Sauron is not going to go away. We're not going to eliminate them. 2016 wasn't the end of the story. Things have gotten way worse since then.
Yeah.
But that's fine as long as you keep this information in your head. Like don't let it go. Don't let it get deplatformed. Maybe get like some old hard copy books to give to your grandkids, you know, at some point in the future. Or if you're good at like metal work, like maybe you can etch the 10 Commandments into a metal tablet and bang it up.
Display it on your roof.
Yeah, like leave it for the future generations, because I think that's really the main tragedy and the main driving point of 1984.
Love history and love the human story. Yeah.
I mean, we should get into that in another stream, I think, because I think the history aspect too is important. But
Do you believe that human beings rode dinosaurs and the government erased that information?
Yeah. Well, no, Big Brother was riding dinosaurs. It wasn't Jesus. Like I remember when I was a kid, people were saying that Jesus rode dinosaurs, but no. Now I'm looking into the archives and it says Big Brother was riding dinosaurs. So
right.
Yeah, and the education of children. So my closing.
Read to your kids. It's not racist.
Yeah. Be good to your kids. Like don't get too hung up on deplatforming and what the lefties are canceling. Because like if somebody gets canceled, right? Like I know a lot of people flip out about cancel culture and you're really upset about cancel culture. All it means when you hear like Big Brother fan or Right Geek has been canceled, all it means is that some idiot INSOC guy has decided not to listen to Right Geek anymore.
And were they listening to Right? Yeah.
Probably not.
The people who cancel you weren't going to support you at the beginning.
Yeah, it should be a mark of honor. I think conservatives tend to be very conscientious and they tend to be very sensitive to things like that, which is why I think it works so well on you guys.
I mean, it has an outsized effect on people who are financially vulnerable. Like if you're rich and independent, who cares, right? Like that, it might even be fun in that. So become more independent, essentially.
Well, I mean, even then, I mean, because the weird thing was, like back in the '90s, like you could get canceled by PC types and conservatives and liberals and people on the left and people on the right, and you could run with it and turn that into
maybe Twitter just makes it more liquid. It makes the process of getting canceled move quicker than it would if it was people reading newspapers, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just some weird like. I hesitate to use the term magic because that makes it sound, supernatural. But magic in the sense that it's misdirection and it's using language in a way to control how people think and how people perceive the world. If that makes any sense.
Okay.
I think there's
the mentality. Canceling itself could be a weapon, but the fear, you're tying back into the observation.
Yeah,
thing.
like
observing
I think,
people can be a weapon. People being afraid of being observed could be a weapon. Same with being canceled.
Yeah, I think people now like they're taking the accusation of being canceled more deeply. They're feeling that more deeply than they should, right? Like things like that, you should just be like, okay, whatever, bunch of. Like if again 1990s, if you heard that like Pat Robinson or something had said you're filth and you're anti-family, you'd just be like, yeah, that's great, haha, to each them on the nose. So I don't know. I think people should be anybody listening this, don't forget what you've learned. Don't forget the things that you believe in. certainly be open to new ideas, right? But reason and truth and beauty and your family, like those things all exist, and stick with them. So if we do another 1984, changing history and indoctrinating children, yes, I would agree. I think those two things are incredibly important. This is again why it takes so long to go to 1984.
It has probably like 3 or 4 different massive giant ideas. That could take hours. Yeah.
Maybe for right now, like the theme was like the overview plus the trauma, I guess, like people being scared and how your fear gets you to compromise with your values. But yeah, definitely the changing history and the indoctrinating of children. We could do at some point in the future, if Crime Think Geek ever gets put back on the platform.
You got these platformed already. It's happening.
Oh, is she back?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah! Hello.
Oh, they haven't completely canceled me yet.
All right. Did you resolve it? That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're coming in.
Okay, good. All right, so yeah, it is getting kind of late. So why don't we plan to have another stream on this book at some future point?
Okay. Well, I mean, you need to do your first stream at this point because you cut it out at like half an hour or something.
We'll let Right Geek do the opening summary next time to catch up on what you didn't get.
We'll give you like a monologue for like an hour. You'll laugh,
yeah, I'll have a monologue for all the other things I've been thinking of. But
who is the comedian guy?
But what I said in the chat about indoctrinating children, for sure, I want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, you'd have first-hand experience with that. You're in the trenches, aren't you?
Yeah.
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 So.
And currently it is the bee in my bonnet. So yeah, so next time I definitely want to get into that for sure.
Yeah, well, I don't know how it is with you. I've been hearing a lot about like pushback, like people are canceling like race education now, and they're trying to get rid of like LGBTQ flags in classrooms, and like there's definitely been some kind of a teachers' revolt. Has that been?
Boy, it feels like
there's.
Yeah, go ahead, right, because you know more about that.
There's been a lot of pushback, especially in school board meetings. But of course, Merrick Garland now wants to declare all those people domestic terrorists because they're actually fighting against that BS. So that's why I said in my beginning opening, and apparently now I am a supporter of domestic terrorists because I back parents who fight their school boards 100%. As a teacher, it is not my job to take kids away from their parents, right? And tell them things that their parents don't want them to hear. As a teacher, I am a client. The parents are my clients, right? And when the parents come to me and say, I want you to teach them their algebra, or I want you to teach them calculus, that's what I do. I don't go off on my own little jaunt teaching the kids things that the parents don't want me to teach them. So it actually genuinely fills me with rage that there are teachers out there that are taking advantage of young, unformed minds in a captive audience to pull their bullshit. So yeah, we can definitely get into that a lot more in the next stream. So
nice. I'm looking forward to it. That sounds spicy.
All right, so thank you, both of you, for coming in, and anyone who is listening now or later on asynchronously, please tune in next time when we have our part 2 of the 1984 stream, in which we'll talk a little bit more about the literal erasing of history and the indoctrination of the young. Thank you all for listening.
I love Big Brother, and I love you guys. Thanks for having me on, Right Geek.
We're still alive. we're actually not dead. We are still alive. Don't let them tell you you're dead, please.
Yeah, we are not dead yet.
And
We still have hope.
Also, just on behalf of myself and Marmaduke, Big Brother fan, I'd like to say thank you for letting us run roughshod over your show. Hopefully, we didn't sidetrack it too much. But,
Well,
You
one
know,
of the rules of this channel is Scuba Tangent Zone.
yeah, that's well. There was a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, but before we get into more tangents, we should probably wrap up. But
All right, but thank you very much, and everyone who is listening out there. I hope you guys have a good evening.